All right, I think we should be live. So hopefully people can hear us and Kidneys, they hear you?
Well, let's find out. Hello, hello, hello. I think I'm a bit louder than you, but other than that, it's okay.
All right, they can
You
hear
turn
us.
yourself up maybe a little bit, and it would be good.
All right, this a little better?
A little bit. I'll turn myself down a little bit. I can do that on my end.
Okay, good. So,
Actually,
here you go.
that would require me to remember which direction my mic goes in, and I don't know. Hold on, I'll get it. We're okay. Uh, Hello, chat. We have spent the past hour and 10 minutes talking about what to stream about, which is probably the most Kidneys and Charles thing to do ever.
That's, yeah, probably true. So,
Probably true. Alright, we're good.
great. So, first off, just to be upfront, I think this is going to be a little bit different stream than the ones we've had before.
Yep.
Um, because I think, at least I don't know, Kidneys, you can speak for yourself, have sort of been trying to figure out what to do about these new game engine changes and kind of what that means for what the game's going to look like going forward.
Yeah. No, totally, right? Because, there's ideas I have about what it's gonna look like, and I know you have a lot of ideas about what it means for the game entirely, kind of bigger picture than just changing the engine and what the cards are gonna do now, right? Uh, so we can talk about it. I mean, I've had I don't know a lot on my mind about kind of what I'm doing without the park and a whole bunch of other things like that in general, which some people know about, some don't. But we can break into it. I mean, I'm here once again, sir, as your humble interpreter for the public. And yeah, I mean, I'm just happy to get into it and talk about the state of the game. You did have a thing you wanted
Oh
to
yeah,
bring
yeah,
up
that's
right
right.
at the
Yeah.
start.
So first off, just a quick announcement. So last week we had a discussion about a few players, in particular Ben Zobrist, where we couldn't quite understand why the model seemed to be giving them better ratings than either of us expected looking at the raw numbers. And what I found was that actually I seemed to have introduced a bug in the way I was importing data from the card pool sometime around 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that means the future legend stream also would have been affected by it, where I think what it meant was that I was importing live cards correctly, but all historical cards I was importing incorrectly.
Right.
Uh,
A little bit of a
so
change there.
so this does change several of the ratings, and the problem was the given kind of the way the shift worked. Uh, it was just enough to sort of be noticeable that something was off, but not enough to make it clearly the case that there had to be an import bug or something. So it took a while to notice it, and definitely want to apologize for that. Uh, the players that it makes the biggest difference on are the future legend silver pitchers. And in particular, Liberatore ends up being really, really good once I import
Hmm.
him correctly. Whereas I think on stream we had rated the card a fair bit worse than that.
Well, I had fought for him to be a good card, but it makes a little bit more sense now.
Yeah. So
So, yeah.
now with the revised, I shouldn't say the revised model. It's not that the model changed. It's that I'm actually importing the database correctly now. I was just doing something. This will make sense to anyone who's been playing with the card database. I was just doing something where I checked that I was importing it correctly based on the first row. And so
Yep.
when they made the change to add the year to the live cards, whereas before they didn't have a year at the end of the name of the live card, then it meant that I started parsing things wrong. Or rather, that I would parse the live cards correctly, but assume that everything, yeah.
Right, and that's why after the two Luke Applings last year, I switched everything to card ID. It made my life a little easier, but for sure, yeah. So
Yeah, I'm now doing something similar too. Well, I guess you need
right.
card ID at least because card and year, like there are these two Ted Klazuskis that are both 86. No, but it wasn't.
Yep.
No, it wasn't that I was using the string as the key. It was that I was using the string as a model to make sure that I parsed it correctly.
Oh, like is your double check, and
Yeah,
then
so
the
I was
double check
essentially
was
saying
wrong.
like take
Right.
the first row and make sure that everything, like word whatever uh, is the correct thing. And so what happened was when some of them changed format but not others, I just didn't notice that only some of them changed format. So I quote
Weird.
unquote fixed the format, which actually had the effect of breaking everything.
Gotcha. What changed on Barry Zito?
What did? That's a
Interesting.
good
I don't see it.
question.
I don't see
Actually,
a
no, I
difference.
noticed they changed a few others. So the one that try,
Oh, the
I noticed there's
team
a card
changed.
name. Well, I noticed there's a card that they changed. Give me a second to find it because I was just curious where that came from. I think
Uh,
maybe they did something. Where is it?
Apparently, Charles, a bunch of players were using the AAA team in the title instead of the Major League team.
Okay, no, but here's the other one that they seem to have changed. This guy, Specs to Porcher. This Z
Oh.
didn't used to be there.
Z is new. They added
They
a
added a
letter.
Z, and if you go to like the baseball reference page,
Right.
unless I just maybe I'm blind. Maybe everyone in chat's gonna tell me that
There.
actually the Z was always there and I missed it. But I'm almost certain it hasn't always been there.
So this is really interesting because no, there's no Z there.
Well, there's no Z there in baseball reference, but if you go to his Wikipedia page,
It
apparently
has.
his father's name was Teporcher with a Z.
Oh.
And then I guess he
Ah.
picked a different spelling, but also baseball reference doesn't call him Specs. So Wikipedia
Well, it
calls him
does. It
Specs.
right. It does have a note underneath his name though that says sometimes presented as Specs and not George. So.
Yeah, so if you go to his Wikipedia page, it says
Right.
Specs to Porcher with no Z, and then Born to Porcher with a Z.
Right. Born. Interesting.
But unless I'm just completely hallucinating, no. Okay, chat seems to agree that didn't used to have a Z in it. So I think they've done something to upgrade. They've done something to update, maybe from a different source, is what it sounds
Well,
like. And that source has a Z.
they mentioned at the start of the year that they have like a new type of database system that they're maintaining themselves now, and that there would probably be a few misses, and so this just seems like something they chose and updated. Uh, People are saying it used to have three Z's. Actually, that's
There's
interesting.
no
We're
way it
just
used to have
all.
three Z's. I
Was
will.
it like
Yeah.
Specs to Porsche, but there was a Z in the last name, and the S's in the first name were also Z's?
Or maybe they put you could put a Z in the first name. The Specs could be like a CZS maybe.
I don't
No, but
know.
he definitely. But so he did wear glasses though. So I think that's where the
Right.
name came from.
That is where the name appears to have
Okay,
come
no,
from.
okay, no. We seem to agree that there is a new Z in here.
Oh, interesting.
Anyway, so they definitely did something to update the cards, but that Z is not what broke my model. The other stuff did, and so if there are any, this is ZZ Top was named after.
Were they originally supposed to be ZZZ Top, but then they figured they'd put their audience to bed, so they decided to cut one? Um,
Um, yeah, so if there are any cards that people are curious how they should have been rated, I'm happy to go back and do that. Um, happy to go back and do that, but it's also going to be a little bit worthless, which I think is the discussion that we mainly need to have.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, there's a lot to talk about. Where are you feeling like we should kind of get started?
I
Started.
was talking like Z. It's a good theory. Uh,
Uh,
well, so maybe first off, it is worth just mentioning, what the changes to the game engine are.
well, that we know of. I mean, we're still speculating on 2/3 of them, right? So, uh,
Wait, Snailman says the Z was always there.
so maybe it got removed at some point and then re-added. It could actually be that. I don't know. We'll see. Um, Weird.
Now I'm even more. Yeah, all right.
We'll
I
figure
mean, I
out the
guess it could
mystery of
always
the
have been
Z
there
at some
because
point.
I will say that font is really difficult to read.
Well, on the card art, yes. I mean, in the title is a different
No,
thing.
the title it's clear.
Excuse me. Yeah. Hmm.
Um,
Oh, they say they always had Z's. Connolly says there was 11 Z's in 2023, which I'm starting to believe may not be the case. Um, that's rather funny. Anyway, back to the card. I mean, where do you want to start with changes to the engine? We want to go over what we think they're going to be, and then a few after effects, things
yeah.
like that.
So the biggest one. Let's see. I can probably pull up the list, right? Because there was a slide. I don't have a good way of showing the slide, but there should be a slide from from DishNet Stream.
Right. You could also bring up the post from Matt. I could send you as well if you want.
Sure, yeah. If you got a list, I can just kind of.
Yeah, so here's the one from Dish, if you'd like that.
Whichever, yeah.
And then I'll grab you the one
That's fine.
from
No,
that
I'll just
article.
read that. Okay, so first off, it says the primary purpose is to address the current tourney run environment, generating BABIP values that are too low. So this is absolutely something that is happening. If we look at here, I'll just pull up what's a good one to pull up for a tourney environment.
Something modern, probably.
Is Daily Diamond modern?
Daily Low Diamond is modern.
All
It's
right,
the Daily Low Diamond.
let's go Daily Low Diamond then.
I think Daily Low Diamond's modern.
Thank you. Yeah, Low Diamond's modern. Okay, so if we pull up the Low Diamond, we can just take a look at what the typical BABIPs are for the teams that are in it. Oh, if it's round one, actually, I've played 2 games, so it may not be so useful, but I'll try it anyway. Sorry, team stats, pitching stats. So if we look at these BABIPs over here, again, this is only going to be 2 games, so we haven't really equilibrated or anything, but we can see the BABIPs look like they range from maybe a low of 0.088 to a high of about 340, and maybe the average is probably in the low 200s, something like that. And this also is contributing, as you can see from the ERAs and so forth, or earned runs allowed or anything. This is contributing to an environment in which there are relatively few runs scored, because if you can't get on base, you're not going to thank it. It tells you the average at the bottom. Oh, 266 is higher than I expected. So all right.
I think that's actually a little lower than what the observed for this format is, but it's around there, right?
I guess maybe it gets lower as you go on because some of the weaker teams are just giving up a lot of everything but don't play as many games, or because this is early in the tournament.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I probably should have grabbed one that's finished.
Yeah, chat knows at this point if you've been listening to me on stream or either or whatever. And yeah, Jim Unknown Games maybe. It's far too low, right? It's not really within the margin of error compared to where it should be. And that's kind of caused a double down effect because now people are not playing cards that have BABIP because they have less impact, right? And then therefore BABIP's even lower now, right? So things
Yeah,
like that, right?
absolutely. There's definitely a feedback effect where if it's difficult to score runs via singles and it's difficult to get singles, then you just don't pick players that tend to try to score via singles.
Right.
And maybe you even get aggressive by punting defense at positions where, as much as shortstop defense is normally critical, if the main thing shortstops do is cut down on singles and you can cut down on the singles with your pitching instead, maybe that's more
Hmm.
efficient. I don't think I
Yep.
ever quite did that at short, but I definitely punted third base defense in this format and would have strongly considered second base defense if the right card came.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
Jeter no longer playable. Yes. Also says there are adjustments to strikeout and home run rates. And
which
go ahead.
no, we would the home run rates. I think everybody assumes is going to be turned down a little bit. The strikeout rates. There's a people on both sides of the aisle here because people are striking out more in tournaments right now than what they should be. The problem is if you make people strike out less and you increase BABIP, it's kind of a doubling down. It'll be very important.
Is there a strikeouts per
But
nine here? I was just trying to see where we were at.
I don't think home runs are going to be converted. No, home runs are going to be converted to not striking out.
Okay, well, here
Would
we
be
go.
my
So
guess.
it's basically 1,100 strikeouts in 1,100 some odd innings. So
Yeah.
it's nearly what? That's probably about 8.3 or something per nine. Trying to do that in my head.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's around there. I
So
just,
something like that.
um,
And similarly, the home run rate, 185 home runs total in 64 games. So you're getting 1.5 homers per team per game.
which is a little high, but again, everybody is playing power cards because it's like the only way to score runs right now because of the BABIP suppression. And I personally am quite afraid that we're already overcorrecting by touching home runs at all, and we can dive into that. I would also be if we're correcting strikeouts being too high, which again I think it's because people don't care about avoid K right now because it doesn't really affect the power and eye hitters. If we're gonna turn strikeouts down, not only is it probably an overcorrection, it's probably making BABIP even stronger when it gets buffed.
Yeah, or at least if you turn strikeouts down and you turn home runs down, the effect will be more balls in play.
Right, and then
That at
we're
least is clear.
buffing the right, and we're buffing the balls in play to go for hits a lot more than they currently are, right? Um,
Right.
so I'm
Um,
I'm interested. I mean, I could see them like in my opinion, I would actually rather they make strikeouts a little higher to compensate. But I would assume if they're changing them, they are lowering them, not raising them. Would be my guess. So.
well, I think this question kind of comes down to why they're doing it in the first place. So I
Hmm.
think first off, I should just be upfront. Uh, I think this is a disastrous change for the direction of OOTP. Uh,
I don't. Well, it's interesting, right? Because I have not the complete opposite take because I think like fundamentally there's going to be issues that come out of this, right? And we definitely agree on those. Um, the problem is like at what point do you have to do something? Because to be honest, the current tournament format is the most boring format I have ever played in my life, and there's no escaping it. It's every tournament. So I don't know. You have to do something. I'm unsure. Like this is the easy solution. I'm unsure how like applicable some of the other solutions were. Right.
well,
So we can
so
talk about that if you
I
want.
think there are two significant problems with the way this is being done, and I think
Hmm.
both of them are going to make the game very difficult to play for, especially for free-to-play players.
Right.
So let me
Um,
start with the first problem, which I think is the one that worries me the most.
mhm.
I don't understand why this is the solution they're picking. I do understand why this is the solution that a lot of the community was asking for. And the reason, what I mean by that is there are two ways that you can go about trying to analyze what happens and figure out, how should we play the game. And the approach that we take in this stream is very different from, I think, the approach most people are taking modeling things, even if they're modeling. So Kidneys, for example, in the sheet that he puts together, as I understand it, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but fundamentally the approach is you observe the environment, you look at the statistics, and then you try to figure out what numbers should correspond to what statistics. If I gave you a new, say pitcher BABIP, what BABIP should that correspond to based on the other observed data?
Right. So my goal with what I do is I'm filling in holes in data, right? Because I'm taking cards that aren't being played and I can tell you what they'll do based on the current environment. The difference is, right, there's a few differences between what I can do and what the game does, right? Where somebody like Willie McGee with 120 BABIP versus lefties, I can't tell you what that does because I don't have somebody with a similar number, right? I did have a little bit of a predictive element built into the Perfect League model last year where it was I could set the cards I thought people should be playing and then counteract those cards, right? And so it was a bit of probably a little bit of a mess if you're a real data scientist about, doubling down on a few effects, but the results I got out of it were really good, where I was able to do things like place Cy Young accurately before anybody had ever pitched Cy Young, right?
And the place that this kind of model is going to be best is going to be places when new cards that are released are pretty similar to existing cards, because that means
like
you
I said,
have good data to tell you, so the place you're going to be best is when you're interpolating. If you know how many strikeouts you get for 70 stuff and you know how many strikeouts you get for 80 stuff, then you can do a pretty good job of estimating how many strikeouts 75 stuff should give you.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that, right? Where I can tell you, like, really, really accurately what somebody like Ozzie Smith is going to do, right? I cannot tell you what Willie McGee is going to do with the same level of confidence. I mean, I could collect data for a week and tell you what Willie McGee does, right? But at that point, you should know already. Also, kind of one of my benefits is it's public, it's open source, right? And you can take the data and do what you want with it, right? And that saves a lot of people a lot of time, right? Like, I understand I'm kind of the goodwill of modeling, right? But like the nice thing about what I do is it's accessible. I'm not gonna ever pretend I'm on the same level as like you or as Adafo or Chimera or JD. You know what I mean? Like the people who are actual data people or physics people or whatever, right? And that kind of stuff.
No, but it's a really useful model, and because it's closely connected to the data, what it means is the more you're able to observe, the more you're going to hone in on getting it essentially exactly right.
Yeah. No. I'm not saying it's useless, but what I'm doing is, like I said, it's filling in gaps in data, and I'm doing it at a very basic level, right? Which is why I tend to listen to the smarter people. But yeah, that's one approach.
And that's the approach that almost all of the modelers that I've seen, at least that talk publicly about what they're doing, have taken. To varying degrees of how many bells and whistles they put in the model and how sophisticated they are about collecting data, trying to refine their data and account for choices managers are making, all that stuff. The approach that we're taking with Warbot's different. The idea isn't to predict what would happen if you give it new inputs. The idea is actually to build something that is as close as possible to identical to the game engine. And so what that means is, in principle, if you actually just had the game engine, then if you want to know how Willie McGee is going to perform, the answer is, well, just run the card.
Right, exactly, and collect enough data. I think a lot of people don't realize how much enough data is, but yeah, absolutely.
Right, or in fact, if you know exactly how the game engine calculates it, in other words, the game engine. If the game engine just says, roll a die, and 18% of the time this is going to be a strikeout, You don't even need data. You just take that 18% and you say, okay, this player strikes out 18% of the time. So the idea is you're just reproducing what is actually the code in the game engine and how does that work. And so the advantage is, if you can get that right, the amount of data you need is actually zero. Until something in the game engine changes, if you just give it new cards, just run the same model and you know exactly what it's going to look like. That the only remaining bit of prediction isn't actually collecting data about how a player performs, but rather collecting data about what cards other managers are using, so that you know what player set you're running it against.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a huge thing in the game, and you tend to err on the side of going a few levels up, right? Because you like to play where you're beating what most people are playing, and I like to play a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time, I just like to play what I think are the best cards, right?
Yeah, and I think which one wins depends on how mature the meta is as well. So that's the rough idea. So this is kind of why I'm worried now about what's happening here. Because the approach that OOTP should be taking should be the same approach I'm taking, but better. Because I had to try to reverse engineer what's in the game engine, and that means hopefully I have it close to right, but it would be very unlikely that I have it line for line correct. They have it line for line correct. If they want to know how cards are going to behave against each other, they can just run them. So OOTP should never be in the situation of discovering that, OOTP should never be in the situation of discovering that the game engine doesn't output what they want it to for their card pool, because they have the game engine and they have the card pool.
They do have those things.
They should just be able to run them and look at the answer. And so if they're finding that the BABIP is very low, this shouldn't be a surprise to them, because, as an example, Kidneys and I had this discussion. We first started talking about Addy Joss versus Tannehill. There was a discussion we had, I think, on the main Discord almost a couple months ago at this point. And
we had it in DMs for, I posted I wanted to sell the best pitcher in the game, and you said, yeah, right, and I DM'd you like, hey, I'm trying to sell a card, I actually think it's the best pitcher in the game, like, shut up, and you're like, well, is he? And we started talking about it, and we came to the conclusion that, yeah, he's a really, pitcher BABIP's crazy, and we had almost no data at that point either, right?
Well, because if you may remember exactly what I said was, look, I haven't modeled pitcher BABIP yet, but if pitcher BABIP looks anything close to as strong as you think it is, they've misbalanced the game engine so badly and so far away from baseball that this can't possibly have passed quality testing.
Yes, and I think another really important part in you discovering that, it wasn't that you were wrong, but you were just making the mistake. Well, yes, but I wasn't gonna say that on your stream. The mistake you made, right, and why you were wrong was you were evaluating an out as an out, right? And you said, like, hey, if I strike out, why wouldn't I rather have stuff instead where I strike out more players? And I go, but a strikeout isn't worth the same amount as a hit turning into an out. A hit turning into an out is worth way more than a strikeout,
it wasn't that
right?
exactly. It wasn't. No, it wasn't that. It was that I essentially said, well, thinking about both real baseball and the whole underlying OOTP model, and also just what it would do to the game balance. No matter what you're seeing in small sample sizes, there's no possible way that Addy Joss is really going to have like a 200 or 210 or something BABIP against, because that would be so incredibly overpowered that nothing but BABIP would matter. It must be that this is going to equilibrate at 290 or something.
Right, and they would also have to just be ignoring real life. Like, you would have to take every pitcher's real life BABIP against at 100% face value, ignoring defense, ballparks, you know what I mean? Like, You just have to take it straight at face value at being 100% accurate. And when your entire game is built around a fielding, independent pitching model, that sounds like a very big leap to just add into the equation, right?
Yeah, the whole model of OOTP starts with 3 true outcomes. This is why anyone that first starts modeling the game, the easiest thing to model are the 3 true outcomes, because they're kind of the base around which the game is built, and then the complexity comes in sort of more in everything else.
Right.
And that's also why, if you're thinking about how can I build my own model, if you just get the 3 true outcomes right, you're going to have a lot of the game worked out, and you're going to have a good idea of, where to start building lineups and things like that. But the problem is, what they did, was transparently something where, as soon as you decide that the best cards in the game truly will have a 200 pitcher BABIP against, or something in that range, everything else is going to become, well, there are 2 problems. The first is it's going to be unrealistic. But the second is, from a gameplay point of view, what you're essentially doing is you're making a lot of other things insignificant. Because the problem is the gap between, think about everything else in OOTP. What is the difference in BABIP between running, the worst possible defense you could put out there and the best possible defense you could put out there?
Right.
So all of the value that goes into defense, which is a big component of the value of players in the past and a big component of the value of players in real baseball, if essentially just being willing to sacrifice things and, add 20 points to your pitcher BABIP rating means you no longer have to play a defense behind this guy, then from a gameplay point of view, that ends up breaking what's happening. And I think that's what, and so this is where I think managers that were frustrated were getting frustrated, is they essentially said, well, wait a minute, what you've now done is you've just told me that pitcher BABIP dominates, which first off means evaluating pitchers, 1 rating dominates, and maybe 1 or 2 start to get next most important. But second, if pitcher BABIP is that dominant, you've now said that avoid K is not important, because the balls in play turn out to be outs anyway, so it doesn't matter so much if you strike out. You've said that defense ratings stop being important, because the best way to get people out isn't to invest in defense, it's to invest in pitcher BABIP. And you've said BABIP isn't that important.
Well, it's also a note on top of pitcher BABIP being so important. It's also the lowest weighted rating in the overall formula. You can tell this just by looking at movement and seeing how little of an impact
if we go in the
BABIP
card
has
shop,
on movement. Right.
Is Maddox the one I was thinking of? There's one that has just a big difference between.
Look at
who's the guy that has like 120?
Marmol.
Thank you, Thank you. Yeah, there's one
Marmol
that has.
Is who you want.
Thank you. Yeah.
That card. Right. Yeah. Where 100 points of pitcher BABIP is 20 points of movement, or it's not even. It's 15 points of movement, right? Like it's less than that. It's so little valued. And we've just already come to the conclusion it's by a mile the best rating on a pitcher, right? Like, it's not close.
Right.
And so it compounds the problem now, because now I can go get somebody like Silver Kenley Jansen and play him in Diamond League, and he's one of the best pitchers in the game, right?
As Iridescent Porta points out, they've sort of rebroken it, and I think that's right, is baseball's basically learned that this isn't the way the game works. And maybe modern sabermetrics are saying it's very slightly the way the game works, but it certainly isn't the way the game works to anything close to the level we're talking about here.
Right. No, it's because, again, the only way you get these pitcher BABIP numbers being this effective is if you're taking them at 100% face value, right? Where if Zach Greinke had 1 year where his BABIP against was 30 points lower than all his other years, then he deserves 90 pitcher BABIP on the card, And I don't think that's a realistic conclusion, but it's what the game is showing us, right?
I think there was maybe a desire to do one other thing as well, and Addy Joss is a good example. There
Okay.
is a problem trying to understand how do you translate, so a lot of the fun that we have with the history side of the game comes from the dead ball cards. And I know there are
Yep.
people like Snailman that are, I'm enthusiastic about it, but there are people that are even considerably more enthusiastic about that than I am. Um,
Yep.
but a lot of the fun is the history of it. You know,
Hmm.
I didn't know who Specs to Porcher is, but now not only do I know how to spell his name, but I know something about him.
Right. Right.
But there is a problem figuring out how do you do that translation. In other words, should you take a guy who batted 420 at face value in terms of a BABIP that corresponds to that if you were to place him in the modern game when he almost certainly wouldn't? But on the flip side, how do you deal with a guy like Addy Joss where, one of the things I like about the Addy Joss this year, I've been making the case before that he may be the best pitcher in the history of the game, at least in terms of
Yes,
peak.
that is a very legitimate argument. He
Um,
died very young, very tragically, sadly, and
yeah,
we
he
won't
died
know.
young, and
But
he died young, and he also kind of played for a Cleveland team that just couldn't figure out how to score any runs at all.
Mhm.
So in an era where people thought about wins, even more so than they did a few decades later,
Right.
that also hurt him. But this
Hmm.
guy may well be the best pitcher in the history of the game. Certainly in terms of
Yep.
peak, as much as I'm a Pedro guy. Um, Look at his 1908 season.
I know.
I still understand how you manage this. Once, not only a 116 ERA, but a 168 FIP.
Yep.
806, let's see, 806 whip, 204 ERA plus. He went 24 and 11, by the way.
Yeah, he also led the league in lowest walk rate and had allowed 2 home runs in 300 innings. And yeah, it's dead ball. That's still impressive, right?
Right, absolutely. But at the same time, he had 3.6 strikeouts per nine. So the question is, how do you make a card which is a historical representation of Addy Joss, but also behaves in the modern game? Like, do you decide that Addy Joss just, if you put him in the modern game, would strike out, 12 guys an inning? I mean, 12 guys a game because that's the kind of thing you have to do to reproduce such a low FIP?
Well,
That looks
there's
historically weird. Um,
I think there's era adjustments that are a bit off too that I'd like to see happen. Like somebody I think it's Rube Waddell, who was like the strikeout pitcher of back then, right? Like of the dead
yeah,
ball era. He was the strikeout pitcher. I would like to see him come into the game with 200 stuff, and he's never had it, right? Um, so I think you can make it a little more extreme, but you're right in the sense that with how the game works, Addy Joss would never be as good as he probably could be.
or what do you
Right?
do with
Or
his?
should be.
Okay, the next season's actually in some ways crazier. So, how about a 171 ERA? He literally did not allow a home run in 242 and two-thirds innings.
Right. How do you scale
Um,
that on movement?
and by the way, he went 14 and 13.
Yeah, it seemed not good.
Uh, yeah, so that's
yeah,
fine.
so
But if you're going to make it more irrealistic, I think if my suspicion is that the idea of pitcher BABIP was a way of solving this problem by essentially saying that the historically justified solution is that instead of Addy Joss striking a lot of people out, you're basically going to let him pitch with a dead ball instead of a live ball. And
can
so
you
you're
just
going to
do
use this
me a
pitcher
favor
BABIP to fix it.
and
Yeah?
can you also just bring up Roger Connor on stream real quick?
Sure.
Yeah, you have the card shop open. All I want is to see both Roger Connors on
You
stream.
want
'cause there's
the
two of them.
91 or the 74?
Both. So 91 has 11 power. Now
Well,
can you
hold on.
open the silver
I have
card?
both. I have both of the cards. So let me just pull up.
Well, I mean, chat can see.
I can
It's
do.
a 40.
No, I just mean I can do the
Right.
comparison for you. That's all.
Right. But I mean, it's a 42-point power difference, and one of them very clearly probably got hand edited, and the other one got left alone because Roger Connor was actually an excellent power hitter in the dead ball era, right? And I guess you could come to the conclusion that dead ball players should never hit home runs, but then like you add Ned Williamson,
Who does? Yeah.
and you give him power, and Ned Williamson, the only reason Ned hit so many home runs was because of a rule change with that specific ballpark. Like, and picking and choosing, I feel like is a real bad way to balance older era cards, personally.
Yeah, I think
that's my point.
I think the idea of pitcher BABIP seems to have been, if I had to guess, it might have been a way to try to tackle this problem. That how can you make dead ball era cards feel different from modern cards because they really are.
Yep.
But at the same time find a way to have them compete on equal footing. Because the solution in past cases was always that just Addy Joss, yeah, he was a movement and control guy, but you'd still give the peak Addy Joss 110 stuff or something because he needed that to be competitive.
Yep.
So you just make him a strikeout pitcher as well. Gavin Kravitz. Yeah, Gavin Kravitz was a power hitter for his era, but not a power hitter historically. But of course, Roger Connor.
Right.
I mean, he was the home run king for I forget how many years, but quite a while, right?
No, I think that's brothers. But Roger Connor, I mean, he had like a 7-year stretch where he 17, 14, 13, 14, 7, 12, 11, 8, where nobody was hitting home runs, right?
I'm pretty sure Roger Connor kept the record until Ruth. I think he kept the record until Ruth. I can look it up.
Oh, you're right. It was him. I don't know why I thought it was Brothers. Brothers also had some good seasons, but it was Roger Connor. Yes.
So this was the preeminent power hitter in the history of Major League Baseball until Babe Ruth.
Mm-hmm.
It's just Babe Ruth was literally 6 times better or something.
Yeah, almost that. Yeah. Yeah.
So I do understand. I do understand what they were thinking. I believe, as far as trying to make this happen, but the problem is the result should have been kind of obvious. So if you wanted to make that work, for example, if you wanted to make that work with a card like Addy Joss, and this is still an excellent card, but this stuff needed to be not 70. This stuff needed to be like 30.
Yeah. If you're gonna
and if you do that, if you made this card have essentially no stuff. So this is a card that just keeps the ball in the ballpark, doesn't walk people, has a huge pitcher BABIP. It probably would have been competitive, and you would have had a choice between running this shape, behind a weaker infield defense, or like a different sort of shape and a better infield defense maybe.
Right, and I also think if the goal of pitcher BABIP was to era adjust, then we shouldn't be seeing pitchers like Marmol coming out of the park era with 100 pitcher BABIP as well, right?
Right. Yeah. That's the other problem.
Because then they're allowed to have 100 pitcher BABIP, and they're going to have high stuff, which doubles down or other ratings as well.
Right. So I think the first problem is that just fundamentally the model stopped being baseball-like, and the result was that we end up with a game that's less baseball-like. But what I don't understand is sort of how you could ever run testing and not discover that this is true, because as I said, this was such an outlandish effect historically that I literally sort of called Kidneys a liar basically, because I was like, you couldn't possibly mean that. You can't possibly think that they really did something this imbalanced as the big introduction. And I was entirely wrong. They did. But
I want that framed on my wall. No, I mean,
so JDA, we're going to come to League in a second, because that's the next bullet point in this slide.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Right, and I mean, again, like, I know some people may think I have some hot takes about like how the game works and things, and I certainly have hot takes about how I want the game to play. However, I'm just the data guy. I just tell you what's happening, right? Like I'm not doing like something crazy or nuts.
Right.
And like if I have 2 weeks of data on a card, I'm gonna tell you what he's doing, and I'm gonna be right. Like it's
Right.
not a debate. You know what I mean?
Because there are some things that especially when you're trying to build a model, there are some things that you just discard because you decide that it can't. It can't actually be something that's been done. So one of the most difficult things in data analysis is it's very easy to find correlations. This is actually what machine learning is such a big advance in. I'm actually teaching sort of a machine learning course at the moment, and one of the points I make, my day job is I'm a physicist, and in physics, it's almost like if I got to be a physicist right when they invented calculus. And the difference between the algebra you can do before and after calculus is just enormous. And you can use that to make incredible physical models and incredible ideas you never had before. But you can also use it to make horrible ones. And it's still your job as a physicist to figure out which are which. And what machine learning has given us fundamentally is this incredible tool for producing correlations. Much better tool for that than we ever had before. But it's still our job to figure out which are meaningful and which are spurious. So part of what you have to do in building a model is use your external knowledge and disregard some things as obviously spurious.
Yes.
So for example, let's say that I just told you that it turns out that if a player's stuff ends in a 7, if the last digit is 7, they actually get twice as many strikeouts.
What?
Okay, and maybe you actually found a few rare examples and somehow got a correlation that there is some correlation between the last digit and the strikeout rate or something. I think even if you find a correlation, you should disregard it. You should essentially say just that isn't something that possibly could have been done because they're trying to model baseball.
Right. I think the best example of this, Charles, is one that comes up a lot. People, keep saying things like, if a pitcher has a fly ball tendency, they give up more home runs. And it has nothing to do with the tendency. They just probably in general have lower movement ratings, right? Or lower home run ratings. It literally has nothing to do with the tendency, right? Whatever, and that's you have the correlation, but that's not the reason, right?
Right. Well, no, the divorce rate in Maine might be related to the per capita consumption of margarine. I mean, that you could come up with a theory for, right? Okay, no supersymmetry in player statistics. Hold on, supersymmetry's just around the corner. We've known that, it's like cold fusion. It's been 5 years away for the last 6 decades.
Cold fusion. It's coming. I keep seeing articles. They're close. It's gonna happen.
For the last 6 decades, cold fusion has been 5 years away.
For my lifetime, the one that I keep seeing is we're gonna be able to clone a woolly mammoth. It's happening. It's gonna happen any day now. Any day now.
So we just had a breakthrough. Yeah.
So
this isn't mostly the kind of physics I do. I'm more an astrophysicist, but that's probably a completely separate set of discussions. The point is, right. I don't even remember where we were. We were getting to something about these models.
The point is in data, just because there is a relationship doesn't mean there actually is. Just because you can see one and the numbers are good, it doesn't mean that's what's going on, right? Like, I could chart home run rate off pitchers based on movement, But that's because home run rating is 90% of movement. It's not because movement affects home runs,
Right.
right? Um,
But here's the difference. The difference is when you're working from data, that's true.
yes.
But when you have the game engine source code sitting in front of you,
Right.
that's no longer true. Because
Yes.
then
The
you know
only
exactly how it works. You don't have
right.
to run it 10,000 times. You just you just figure out, you just sort of figure out what the rate is going to be in the long-term average. What is the probability of hitting a home run? Just calculate it. You know that's the answer.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. You have the exact engine and model and ability to replicate it any way you want. You should never need data. You don't
right,
need data. You have the exact way it works. You are
right.
God in this
And
universe. Right?
this is why I know it's a bit of a meme, but this is why every time the discussion comes up, I explain that I don't use data.
Yes.
I use the card catalog, but once I have a model that seems to be doing a good job of reproducing what the actual game engine does, it doesn't make sense to observe noisy data. It makes sense to just put the numbers in and see the answer. And
Right.
OOTP should be better at this than I am because I've had to guess about some things that they did. They know the answer.
Right, and the thing is too, and we brought this up before the stream, right? Is that you're a physicist, right? And almost everybody else doing this are data scientists, and we approach things in fundamentally different ways, right? Where I see what has happened, right? And then I go, okay, that's how this works, right? And you see what happened, and then you recreate it a billion times to make sure it works that way. You know what I mean? Is kind of my rough understanding, right? And so, I could witness, I don't know why this come to me, like a particle collision and say, oh, that does this because it's done it 5 times in a row. And you'll build a particle collider, right? That's kind of,
you don't want me working with my hands. I mean, there's a good reason I'm a theorist.
But that's the general principle, right? Is you're going to go recreate the thing, and we're going to look at how the thing has worked. And the thing is out of the park, has exactly how it works, and there should really not be room for discrepancy.
So they know how it works, and so there are 2 things that immediately worry me about what they're saying here.
Mm-hmm.
So the first is that they're discovering at this point that it's an issue because this should have been something that they knew kind of all along. And either it was considered an issue or it wasn't, but it shouldn't surprise them what the results are because they know the results. And more importantly, not only do they know the results now, but they know what the results look like after power creep, because part of my take on this discussion has been that the nature of the way that this model is broken is going to change as the card pool evolves. Right now, one way to think about it is if you look at the highest pitcher BABIP in the game. Right. Who is it at the moment? Is it Niedenfuhr, or is there a higher one?
Niedenfuhr is the highest one-sided because there probably can't be a higher guy. Overall, I think it's Joe Barry. If that's
Barry's a great card too. Yeah, okay. So 128 is about the highest pitcher BABIP we've seen. Okay.
Right.
So are there going to be higher pitcher BABIPs released with more power creep? As best I can tell, no. In part because, well, it's bad enough to kind of have a model where you think you might get down to like a 280 or 190 BABIP against. If you were to keep going, what is actually the lowest BABIP that someone's given up in a season? I don't know the number, but I'd be shocked if it's much
Tom
below
has
that.
to be up there because in 95 innings he was a .191. And if we see people range higher than that, right? I don't know.
Yeah. So Tycho Lore is saying, based on things we know about in the editor, so I don't think the editor is quite the right thing to do here because there is a difference between what the game that they give us and the tournament engine they're running. Those are very similar but not identical things. But sure, something like that. and you could have
Right.
splits.
Yeah.
But the idea is if this is about as low of a pitcher BABIP as we're going to get. So what does Niedenfuhr look like with power creep? This card with
Mm-hmm.
power creep shouldn't be like 50% more of everything because you can't get
Right.
50% more of this BABIP. What it should be
Mm-hmm.
is more than 50% more of a lot of the other ratings in the same pitcher BABIP.
Yep.
Okay, but on the other hand, for comparison, let's look at who's a good gold bat to kind of look at that's, you know,
Oh,
Schmidt
like
comes
a
up a lot, or
Babbitt gold
what?
bat?
No, just like a
Uh,
typical gold bat, and we'll give it some power
Chipper.
creep. What?
Chipper.
Chipper,
Look at Chipper.
sure. They just gave us this chipper.
He's a big boy.
So here's a great gold bat. What would this card look like with power creep? And the answer is, among other things, the BABIP's going to go up significantly.
Yep.
So what we're going to see as power creep happens from here is the BABIPs of hitters in the game are going to keep going up. Even the guys that have low BABIPs, like in terms of shape, even the ones that are power and I cards, as you make them more powerful, the BABIPs are going to go up. So the typical BABIP of hitters is going to go up from here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, the BABIP of pitchers, the pitcher BABIP, for average shape pitchers will also go up because everything's going up. But
Mm-hmm.
we're not using average shape pitchers in the meta. What we're using right now in the meta are very one-dimensional players. We're using pitchers that are one-dimensional high pitcher BABIP. So everything else is going to go up, but the pitcher BABIP is going to stay the same. We're also
Yep.
using very much I and home run heavy cards. So a card that I see a lot in gold is actually, let's say this, the Joey Bats here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how do I make this card more powerful while keeping it a gold card? Well, I don't think you're bumping power and I think you're bumping BABIP and GAT power, and maybe
Right.
defense or something. So what's going to happen is the extreme batters that we're running are going to get better at BABIP. The good batter, the other shaped cards will also get better at BABIP. But the extreme
Mm-hmm.
pitchers that we're running will not get better at pitcher BABIP. And so over time, whatever the balance is today, it's going to be a higher BABIP going forward.
Oh.
So therefore, how do we fix this? Well, I think the simplest thing to do is simply to go back to a model that's more baseball-like. And the model shouldn't be you rebalance and you shift everything, but rather it should simply be that if you have, your 128 pitcher BABIP against, that doesn't mean the BABIP you're giving up is 200. It means that you've moved from, a 300 to maybe a 285 or something. So something where
Right.
there is an effect, but and that I think is about the intended size of the effect if you look at the contribution of BABIP to movement ratings and to overall ratings and things like that. Um,
Mm.
okay, the lowest BABIP season is actually Niedenfuhr. Thanks.
Yep.
And by the way, the same is going to be true if you're rebalancing home runs and strikeouts, because what is going to happen to this Batista card in the future is his power's not going up and his eye's not going up. It's his BABIP that's going up. But pitcher's movement is going to, pitcher's home run avoidance, is going to go up, right?
Yep.
So
And his Ks are actually probably going up too.
probably, yeah.
Mhm.
So what that means is, trying to rebalance around the symptoms instead of the cause. If you do this now, then you're going to have to rebalance again when you have a different card pool.
Well, and that's also something you kind of touched on earlier, right? This solution makes sense if it's somebody like me not thinking and just looking at my data and saying, "Oh, okay, like home runs are too high, strikeouts are too high, BABIP's too low," and I'm not looking at any of the cards being played right now, right? Because the fact is, because of how strong pitcher BABIP is, everybody's playing cards like Jose Batista. Very few cards that have BABIP are playable, right? Like, my assumption is going to be after the change, the best catcher is like Deacon White now, right? And that's a completely different kind of card, and I'm very concerned we're going to overcorrect the meta,
I'll pull up Deacon
maybe
White.
to the
Just
maybe to the point where somebody like Deacon White is too strong, or even more powerfully, right? Somebody like Willie McGee all of a sudden is the best first left hitter in the game because he just has the highest BABIP and Void K is getting nerfed, right? And that's all that's going to matter now. I don't know, but I do really feel like there's a chance we're overcorrecting here because of what's happening, right?
Right. So I think that's the first thing that really concerns me, is that the solution that's being picked is the solution that you pick if you're looking at data, and not the solution that you pick if you have all of the information available to you, look at the game engine, and test things. Because I don't understand how this solution isn't then going to break again later in the season.
Yes, I've talked about this with you a lot, but this solution is nothing more than a band-aid, right? It is not a permanent solution. Whether they choose to apply another band-aid at some point is different, but it will need another band-aid at some point, right? We're going to hit the spot.
There is a way I would do this if I were kind of running it.
Right.
I mean, some of these are things that probably are easier to say directly to the developers, as far as talking in terms of how the game engine does the calculation. But just I'll give you one example of a problem that has always been out there in the model. The way their model best models baseball essentially is for ratings that are around 50, because that's what looks most Major League like. If you just take a look at the overall Major League Baseball player pool, then you're ending up with typical ratings around 50. When we get toward the best players in the pool, the ratings in everything are significantly away from 50, typically significantly higher. I suppose in Willie McGee's case there are one or two that are lower because it's such a funny shape. But what you're doing is you're essentially coming up with cards which are very far from the place that this is well calibrated. And the same is true with pitcher BABIP. When pitcher BABIPs are near 50, you mentioned you've got a model for gold. So if you take your gold model and you put a 50 rating in, what pitcher BABIP against do you get? I'm going to guess it's pretty Major League like.
If I put 50 into my model, I can tell you if you give me 1 second. I actually just had the hitter one open. But yeah, I mean, like, it would be, not only is it probably like a realistic number, it's also just completely unplayable, which is very funny, right?
Well, it's unplayable because when guys are giving up a 200 BABIP against, you can't give up 300 and survive.
Exactly. Like somebody like Ben Sheets is a great example of this, of probably the biggest noob trap card in the game, right? He's okay, and then he says like 40, 50 pitcher BABIP, and he is literally the worst perfect card I may have ever seen printed, right? He is terrible. It's really bad. So if I went in the gold model, I just sorted by gold cards.
So 39 Cobra, my understanding is that the changes are to the game engine, not the cards. So that the posted ratings currently will be the posted ratings permanently. However, the effect of having a 75 pitcher BABIP today will be different than the effect of having a 75 pitcher BABIP next week.
Yes.
That's my interpretation. That's my interpretation of what's been announced, because we haven't actually seen it to experiment with. But that's how I'm interpreting it. But yeah, you can try it. Like I said, if you put in a pitcher BABIP of 50 for like your gold sheet or something, I suspect you're going to get a number that's pretty MLB like.
Camara was saying it's about 280
in modern. Okay.
Yeah. So
Um,
I actually, you know what's funny? It would take me a long time to get you BABIP because I don't
oh,
calculate for that
okay, don't worry
correctly.
about
So
that. So if it's 280 in
yeah,
modern, then
right.
that's interesting because if you have it against a more
Uh,
typical set of batters, it'll be higher. So
yeah,
what that says is that actually the other 20 points or so of difference are coming from the way managers respond to this weird environment, which is
yeah,
let's just not even bother trying to, make BABIP.
right.
Um, so actually, the fact that it's 280, I think means that our chat is really smart.
I have it being a little worse personally. Actually, wait, what card is this? Because I did like a range. So at 49 VL, I have it being about 311. Though I will say I have noticed my numbers seem to be a little bit higher than other people's numbers
Right.
for BABIP, and that's
But
probably
yeah,
for
well,
a variety of
311 is more
reasons.
like what I was, is pretty major league like.
Yes, yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
right. Okay. Um, is 200 in Sunday Open? Oh, sorry, 50 BABIP. No, I meant 50 pitcher BABIP. Sorry. But yeah,
Right,
50
50
BABIP,
pitcher BABIP. Yep.
exactly, yeah. Because 50 BABIP against 50 pitcher BABIP um, is going to be pretty close to Major League like, is the idea.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah,
that's
yeah.
the way the live cards are calibrated, is, um, okay, yeah, so that's the first problem. Um, the second problem is this is being done without warning and after kind of to whatever extent it was communicated basically saying that this was a problem. I mean, this wasn't a problem. So for Gambit, yeah, JD, I will get to your thing because the league point is next. Sorry,
Yep.
we're still on bullet point one.
Um,
um, so I think the problem is exactly what Gamba gets to, but it's not that you're going to open it up to more pitchers or to more type of players. Rather, the problem is you're still going to have a meta where certain shapes are best. I don't know how to predict what shapes are best because, you know, if what they said was we're fixing it to make it major league like and here's the way we're doing it, then starting from a model of how the game engine works, I might have at least had some kind of guess for how they'd implement it. But when
right.
you're fixing the symptom and not the cause, I have no clue how they're going to implement it. I'm going to have to actually use some data in this case to try to figure out what choices they've made in implementing it and then adjust the model accordingly. So I'll have to basically go back to the reverse engineering stage, use a little bit of data to kind of look through some possible ways that they could have patched it and figure out if one of them looks a lot like the data. Um,
Um, some questions here. Just an
yeah.
interesting thought from Chimera. So he's saying BABIP hasn't changed across some formats as the card pool has changed. Do you believe there's kind of like a league total system in tournaments that kind of like similar to the base game, where they're kind of saying this tournament needs this amount of BABIP on average or should be at the 50 level or whatever, right? Um, or is it just complete open season?
So they claimed there was last time because they claimed, you may remember that at the beginning of 23
Mm-hmm.
they claimed that they accidentally set the typical BABIP to 330 instead of 300.
They did. Yeah.
And then the patch consisted of change it back to 300.
Yep.
So that would seem to imply that there is some target. Now,
Right.
then the question is, how is that target implemented? Because, the tournament and league engines really behave in different ways. The idea of the league engine is you essentially normalize things so that the gap between the best and worst players is always about the same. And
Mm-hmm.
this can't work for tournaments because in a cap tournament, you wouldn't feel like the tournament was playing very well if the gap between your best pitcher in the game and your low iron filler pitcher was as small as it would be if you ran them in the league. So
Yes.
there's this desire that if you actually bring in Like if you run a bunch of low irons in Perfect League, you're going to lose a lot of games. Don't get me wrong, you will lose a lot of games, but you're not going to lose as many games by as much as you would if you ran that same thing in an open tournament.
You want to really frustrate people, chat, make Perfect League, win it, and then play an all iron team, and you'll probably still win like 30 games, and people will lose their minds.
Yeah, but the reason is because of this normalization.
Yes.
You'll also probably break Perfect League that week because it'll cause really weird things to happen to the normalization for the rest of the gaps between cards.
Now you're just making it tempting. You're making it really tempting.
No, the game won't let you do. You say the game won't let you do that. There are ways around the tank bots if you're determined.
Yeah, I mean, if you really wanted to, you could do it. I'm not encouraging anyone to do it. I just think it'd be
That's
funny.
probably not a discussion on stream, but I guess I'll simply say you are required to play the best of what you have available.
Yep. Also, trying it in 23 is probably fair.
That's true.
You
Yeah.
can do that for science.
The one that I was frustrated by was that the tank bot actually, when I was trying to win, would not let me submit my playoff roster.
Yeah, the tank bot is a slave to the overall rating, which this Ben Cheats I probably wouldn't play in silver, so the tank bot doesn't understand a lot of these things.
Yeah. Yeah, but in general, I don't advocate tanking for several reasons. One, just to begin with, it is against the terms of service, and I enjoy the game enough that I think you should play by the terms of service.
Yep.
Second, I just don't see it as being fun. I want to play competitively, and it's not fun to kind of not try to win. But then,
well, I will say the perpetual stuff was very fun, and it was very publicly allowed for a while, and then it kind of turned into 22 at some point. But not trying to win games, but just trying to get the craziest scores possible was quite an enjoyable experience. It is against terms of service now. It was not at the time. No, reverse engineering is not against the terms of service.
Decompiling is against the terms of service. So let me explain a little bit what I mean by reverse engineering. I don't mean doing anything with, say, the code of the game engine. I mean trying to come up with a model that, instead of sort of saying like 70 corresponds to this number and 71 corresponds to this number, says, what is the game engine really doing when it takes these card ratings and turns it into a baseball game? Yep. How does it decide what the outcome of this at bat is? So, for example, what is the strikeout rate? Well, probably it depends on the pitcher's stuff rating. Probably it depends on, things like that. Yep. But the idea of reverse engineering, actually, the history of this kind of goes. Nothing goes way back in in hardware engineering, I guess. But now I'm really dating myself when I do that, aren't I? Well, maybe that's another discussion. But anyway, the point is trying to understand how the game engine does the calculation using only the publicly available things that they give us is not against the terms of service.
Nope. I would say it's encouraged based on content out of the park themselves have put out.
Doing something like, trying to actually work with the executable and, figure out what code they've put, anything once you get into that regime clearly is against the terms of service. But trying to make a model for what's happening not only is not against the terms of service, but I think is an encouraged way to play the game. Right. Anyway, yeah. So the tournament engine is going to be a little bit different, I think, is part of the answer. But to get back to Gamba's question, I don't think this is going to mean that more cards are playable at any given time. I think rather what it's going to be is that different cards become playable. And to me, this is now the big can of worms that gets opened. Because if you think about it, as much as this is a baseball game, at its core, this is really a financial game. The way you compete is you have an in-game currency. You use that in-game currency to do things that will let you acquire talent that help you both win games and win more of the in-game currency so you can repeat the cycle. And so being a successful player at a high level and out of the park involves not just being able to put a baseball team together, but also being able to get the financial side right and make good decisions. In principle, there's an exception, which is, if you're willing to put real money into the game and buy perfect points, then what was the question? Is mayonnaise against the terms of service? Mayonnaise is not against the terms of service, but if I see it on you when you're walking off the mound, I'm ejecting you from the game.
Umpires are furiously scribbling notes. Mayonnaise and beard equals ejection.
Absolutely. Or no, or maybe no, maybe or am I supposed to tell you to wash it off once and then inspect it again? And if it's not washed off well enough, is that?
They have to wash it off with olive oil, and then if their beard is greasier, you eject them. That's how it works.
Okay. Yeah, so that's the problem.
Right.
So what's happening is now, suddenly as a result of this announcement, the cards that are valuable change. And I think this is actually the reason that we sort of labeled this stream kind of like, what is the future of Warbot? Because now I get a bit stuck here. Because I feel like in this stream, the main play, there are sort of two things that we've been able to do to try to bring some value other than a little bit of entertainment, on a Friday afternoon. One is being able to look at new cards that get dropped and essentially ask, look, I can only invest in some of these. I have a limited budget. Which ones should I invest in?
Right.
That's what all of these grades have been about, is, so if you have an infinite supply of perfect points, or are willing to kind of keep swiping your credit card enough to get them, you can literally try to acquire every card in the game. But realistically, that's not what's going to happen. You're going to have to pick and choose which cards you're going to acquire and which ones are going to be useful to you and help you build winning, whether it's league, tournament, or whatever combination you want to focus on, and also which ones are worth their price. So, for example, this Ben Sheets is going to cost you what looks like, okay, probably not really 60,000, probably 32,000 or something right now, if you want to buy this Ben Sheets. Is that a good use of 32,000 points? Well, in the current game engine, quite clearly not, because given the shape of the card and given the importance of pitcher BABIP, this is not a card you want to spend 32,000 points on. You're not going to play him. What happens when the game engine changes? Is this card now more or less valuable?
Oh, I will give the caveat, because I don't think chat gets this a little bit too much. As a speculation piece, this card is worth a mile more than 30k because it is 150 mission value this year. And a lot of people are sleeping on that. If this card ends up in a decent mission, decent mission's a big caveat, but it's probably 80, 90k, no problem. Right?
That's true. I do think it's worth buying cards like this. In general, if you're getting historical perfects for 20k, or something like that, you're always doing well.
Yep.
But okay, so you might ask, well, if that's so smart, have you done it? And normally I don't like to show exactly my strategy, but I will show you whether I've done it. The answer is no. Okay.
Can I just screen share and show you my 11 Ken Kamenides? I got
You're 11.
11
You have
yesterday.
you
I
have
was
11
very excited.
Kamenides.
I was very excited to get 11 last night, so it's
How did
gonna
you
pay off. I
How did you get
promise.
11? Or you just hadn't
I
done the
bought
mission until after buying 10?
I exactly. I bought 10 and I finished the mission last night.
Sneaky.
Yeah.
And hey, in the live update, maybe he'll go perfect.
Maybe Ken Caminiti will get his real ratings in the next live update. At the current trajectory, I think it's possible. Um,
Um, but yeah, so the point is, as you can see, as much as I strongly advocated and I think it's a great idea, and like it would be smart for me to, hey, I can get a Hidalgo for 36K, I should grab one.
right.
I can get 22K for a kit. I actually should just buy this, shouldn't I?
I see. I bought them all for 23K. Like I'm max. I lose 30
No,
grand.
no,
I don't
I
know why
actually
this
should
is such
buy
a big
this.
deal.
Okay, so why haven't I done it? Well, I have 136,000 perfect points right now. Um,
Uh,
if I started buying these, what was it? I probably am 69 of them. Nice. I've got like 5, so even if I could buy them for 25K a pop, I just don't have anywhere close to the points to be investing in all of these.
yep.
And that's everybody's situation.
Hmm.
You always have to choose what to put your points into. And
Yes.
so traditionally, there have been 3 ways that you can compete in this game. Number
Mhm.
1, you buy a lot of points, and then you just cover all your bases. You don't have to
Yeah.
worry. 23K Caminiti just, all right, see, clearly what we really are good at is being a market stream. We should just be an auction house. People should like hire us to sell the cards they need to dump.
Can we just call ourselves like the out of the park Congress, and then we buy a bunch of cards, hype them up on stream, and sell them for twice as much? It's basically how all governments work anyway.
Just go
So,
buy.
yeah, exactly.
So that's one plan, but I don't think that's most of the people that Wall Street bats. That's beautiful. I think Wall Street bats is definitely the winner.
That's excellent. All those are great, but Wall Street Bats really
Wall
got
Street
me.
bats is the winner. Okay, the second plan is essentially what the data modelers and tournament players have often been trying to do, which is there are 69 perfects, but there are really 4 or 5 of these that are important cards. And buy the 4 or 5 that are important cards because that's about what you can maybe afford, and avoid buying all the rest.
Yep.
That's, I think, been the main value of what this stream has tried to do, is to help figure out which are the cards that you should be buying. Buy the S tier cards, don't buy the F tier cards. Mission spec or anything aside.
Mm-hmm.
And the last way has been to find some kind of economic way instead of like baseball way of playing the game. Whether that's been live spec or, I guess, I don't know if there's still people that kind of really play the market and try to like flip cards all the time. I feel like probably the margin's too low to do that, but I haven't, maybe that's a path to success if you're good enough at it.
Yep.
So the question now is, what does this mean for the free-to-play or free-to-play plus players who can't buy everything? And the problem is, as soon as we're told that the game engine's going to change in a significant way and without warning, what that says is anything that you've invested in may change value. Now, if you have everything, it doesn't really matter which are the valuable and which are the less valuable ones, because you still have everything, and so it doesn't affect you too much.
Yep.
But generally, if you're trying to do this on a budget, by which I mean essentially as a free-to-play or a similar player,
Mm-hmm.
then
I will
go ahead.
caveat, even saying like spending $100 a year or whatever on plus, like I was gifted a $500 bundle, and I am still struggling. Now, I've won a lot of tournaments, and I'm looking at my league team or, like, competing in Open or anything out of the Park era, and I'm already priced out. So it's really not only the free-to-play crowd. It's a much bigger margin as well, right?
There is a big margin, but the point is, the solution is that you're essentially only buying the cards that are valuable. But that means if you randomly perturb the values, it always hurts you.
Yep.
You can sort of only get unlucky and not get lucky. Whereas normally we've done the smart thing. So I'll give you an example of what I mean by something which I believe is part of what's behind kind of the timing of this change, has been realizing how it played out, because I don't think it was intended, but also is a smart thing to do. Okay? Let's think about this Jackie Robinson. Okay? This is an excellent card. It was intended to be an excellent card. Okay.
Yes,
how much does it cost? Well, you could buy it directly, but realistically, if you made this via a mission, and you may notice I haven't done the missions yet. So the first thing we need is this gold mission. Okay, this gold mission will cost you 60K essentially, and probably it was closer to 100 closer to release, right? But let's say you were looking at it right now. This Jackie Robinson will run you 60K. Okay, then we need a diamond mission. This diamond mission needed, actually don't remember what the cutoff was. 325 points.
Yeah.
So realistically, probably the cheapest way to do it, you have a couple 97s. You probably need like one perfect and then most of the low ones and one of the diamonds or something. Maybe you could do you could do the 3 diamonds, I think, and you get there. So okay, so this mission probably is in the 100K range. Maybe a little more. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you've got...
I think it's more, but I also use like Tony Phillips to do it, because Tony Phillips is such a good card. I think
so if you're going to use Phillips, which I think is the way to go, let's call it 150. Okay. Then you have 2 perfect missions. You have this one that needs, either the Campanella or the Duke Snyder that's going to run you 200K. So this is going to cost you 200K minimum, right? Even right now, and it was more before. And then you need 290 points out of these, which is probably...
Oh, this is the one with Phillips, not the other one. My bad.
So that's another 150K. So...
and... Yeah, you're much better, like... You're much better off, what's it called? Just buying him, right? I think that's the case with a lot of missions, though, and a lot of people just completely miss that.
Right.
Missions, a lot of the time, are really bad. Please stop feeling obligated to complete them all. Like, think about it, right?
Yeah. But the point in any event was originally it was hard to get the Jackie. But let's say you were looking at, should I spend 600,000 points to make a Jackie Robinson?
Right.
When he was the best card at second base, the answer was, if you have 600,000 points, you can work towards, and you think he's going to be a key meta card for an extended period, might be a really good investment. We clearly rated this an S tier card when it came out. Then what happened was essentially the next week we got this Volpe. And as good as Jackie is, this card is better.
Yes, in the terms of a tournament, not league, right? Because in league we're not seeing the BABIP suppression because it's getting normalized, and defense matters a ton more. The rest of Jackie's bat matters a lot more. It also seems far easier to steal in league than tournaments as well, which benefits Jackie too.
But certainly if you had the choice between paying 600,000 for Jackie or 180,000 for Volpe, and you may notice I haven't bought this card either. But
even if it's 250K for Jackie, Volpe was more useful, right? And cheaper. So
right. So what that means is the decision that I made as a free-to-play plus player was, as much as Jackie is a fun card, I'm skipping it. in the same way that these first Negro League missions, there's some nice cards there. Turkey in particular, when we came out, we looked at the card and we said, this is probably your best outfield, or your best outfielder in the game right now, and he plays multiple positions, so he might be around a little while. But I looked at the cost of those missions and I decided this is one of the ones that can be skipped. So the problem is with these high-end cards, you're always making that decision. Given the price, what should I invest in and what should I skip? And when you invest in something, it's going to be worth a lot. So there is one card that I actually decided was worth the investment. And so I actually did decide to get myself one of these Grover Clevelands.
Yep.
And the reason was just looking at the card compared to where it was in the meta, and essentially deciding that based on where we were price-wise, this was a card that was going to bring its value back. So most of the resources that I had built up in the game to that point, I decided to put toward this card. Was it a good decision? Well, we'll find out, I guess. It's been, I think this card has already brought me back over 100K in value.
Yep.
Okay, how does a 500K card earn its money back? So the answer is basically through tournaments. So the best thing about this card, in addition to kind of the quality of the card, is the era. Because there are a lot of tournaments right now that are set in an era where you only need 3 or even 2 starting pitchers, and is a dead ball type era where the biggest weakness of this card, which is stuff, doesn't really play.
Right. The farther back you go, probably the better this card gets as well.
Yeah. So like if you give me, a tournament in 1912, I can just run this card in Addy Joss and nobody else is throwing a single pitch for me. And anyone who doesn't have an Alexander maybe has an Addy Joss, but half the time has a much, much worse matchup against me. Remember, pitchers get, better when you have shorter rotations. This is Grover Cleveland or Pete Alexander. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So the thinking was that where I'm going to get money back from a card like this is in the tournaments he plays. This card is such a difference maker because he's not just a fifth of the rotation. If we were asking should you play this card in let's say open low cap where you only get a handful of perfects, I actually am still playing him in open low cap, but it's a closer decision because there he's 1 out of 5 starters. And he's not going to throw 9 innings typically because the stamina is a little bit of a weakness for the card, not compared with modern guys, but compared with the dead ball guys. So there it's closer whether it's worth investing in him. But especially in some kind of cap format where you can run only 2 or 3 starting pitchers, this is just a huge edge over everyone that doesn't have the card. And it's a limited edition, so the price is what it is essentially. Did I make a mistake in purchasing him? I still might have. But if you're asking how you get money back, that's at least the concept. Where's the money coming back from right now? Well, someone pointed out on a stream I've got a bunch of choice packs sitting here. These choice packs are going to provide value. In the past week or so, I've stopped opening them. How did I get 500K? Well, it turns out if you save up for a couple months, you can make some point. I think JD, I think we had this discussion before that tournaments do provide winnings. That as a regular tournament player, I think I was getting. There was a week where it was different because I tried to qualify for all of the PTCS, but this is about a week worth of choice packs, and it does average out to something like probably 30K of value-ish per day, with big variance because some of it's coming from the relatively rare times you hit a perfect.
Hmm.
But yeah, so but the idea is you're asking what brings points back. So if you now say, well, which cards are good and which cards are bad is going to change, and it will change because the way the game works intentionally is the card shape matters a lot. Cards aren't better because they're better in every single rating than the previous ones. They're better because they're a little bit better and they have a different shape. And there are a lot of very different shapes in the game right now. So if you
Right.
change what shapes are going to be good in the next engine, you change what are the valuable cards. Is Grover Cleveland Alexander going to be better or worse in the next engine? I'm not completely sure because I expect the pitcher BABIP to be somewhat nerfed, but at the same time, if they also kind of play with the strikeouts in this way, it may be that the gap between him and other dead ball options is still about as big. Um,
Also, it really depends on how they're changing BABIP. I think there's actually a chance where pitcher BABIP has just about the same importance as before,
you mean
and we're
they
just
could? You mean they
shifting
could
things
do
up.
the absolutely insane thing of saying that pitcher BABIP just goes like 400 to 250?
Yeah, or like Evil Smokey Bear says, if they're just making like hitter BABIP more important, pitcher BABIP could actually even be more valuable. It's a very interesting thing that I do hope gets implemented the correct way.
Right. So, but the problem is when you drop this on us without warning, what you've done is you've taken people that have built a strategy and you suddenly invalidate it. Um, that's that's kind of really the problem. Um, so if you take the strategy and invalidate it, the question becomes now how are you supposed to find a smart way to play the game? Like normally what we do on this stream is we go through cards and we rate them and we say, okay, here we go. What's this first one? We've got this Bob Dillinger or something. So you pull up the card and you say, okay, well, I've run this again. I've run some models on this and I've looked at this in the current meta, and okay, this probably in the current meta is not a very good card. The speed, for example, being much more than the stealing would worry me a bit. But generally, the rest of the shape just doesn't fit the meta. Um,
Right.
so normally I'd give this a very low rating, but we don't know what the new game engine is going to look like. What they've said is we're going to change it, and we might change it again because we're going to keep monitoring it. And they're going to have to change it again because the way they're talking about changing it won't work after power creep. So what do we rate this card? We basically just rate it a question mark. We have no idea whether you should buy this card.
Oh,
And that's the problem. So the problem is you take something where it used to be a competition between more resources and more skill,
yep.
and you
Or
remove the
having
ability
both.
to have long-term planning.
Right. Long-term planning is kind of out the window, and there's a few reasons for this. I don't think it's directly just the engine changing. I think, in general, the content plan has been a lot more of a content suggestion, in terms of, dropping Jackie and dropping Volpe, right? And it's, maybe their stuff said Jackie was still a lot better, but the problem is that's not how the game was playing at the
Right.
moment,
Well, I
right?
think that's the problem is they communicated to us that Jackie was a lot better. That Jackie was
Yes.
supposed to be a lot better. And
Right.
and I think this was part of the timing of the change now was this recognition that the intent was for Jackie to be a lot better, but they actually made a game in which Jackie isn't. And
Well, and it
so
also,
therefore
I
and
think
so the
there's,
solution was now to change the game engine to make Jackie better again.
well, I think if whatever they were using to evaluate cards was wrong, and it was pretty clearly wrong. I mean, depending on what you think happened with Yaz, I mean, there's Jackie, there's James Wood not even being a perfect and arguably the best outfielder in the game, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, there's clearly something was wrong, and they have decided the solution was to change the game to be more in line with how they were evaluating things. Is how I'm taking it.
Right.
Um,
And that
I
also
will say,
go ahead.
I hope that this means moving forward we see a much more steady, much more thought out progression of content. Because if we don't see a much more steady, thought out progression of content, and like as Adolfo's saying, it still doesn't seem it lines up with league play well at all. I don't know what to do because, you're mentioning, right, that here we're getting this tournament change a month and a half in. And maybe in 2 or 3 months we're going to need another one, right? Whether they do it or not is another issue, right? But we'll probably need one eventually.
But that's a big problem because it now means that your most important point of spec is not
right.
Is this card good enough to play for a long time, or will this card at least play long enough as it brings, something useful? But am I going to correctly guess the timing and nature of the next game engine change?
That's a big deal, and it's also a big deal. Like, do you buy Grover Cleveland? Well, not really with a pitcher, but like, if you buy Jackie and the next week there's a second baseman that's a 99 that's better than Jackie again, right? Like, you know what I mean? It's very hard to judge right now. In Qualifox, I don't mind changing up the meta a bit. The issue I have personally is if you don't tell me when you're changing the meta, I never want to ever buy a chase card, literally ever. Because I can't.
Speaking of chase cards, I know we promised we'd get to the limited editions. Some point.
Look, it's the ultimate chase card because his name is Chase Utley. He is technically he is actually the most factual chase card we will ever have in the game.
By the way, I'm just curious, looking at the card art on these, because you see that slash in the bottom right corner?
Yeah.
Am I the only one that assumed that was going to be where it said, like, 2 out of whatever?
So, type in limited edition on the, just in the top, see if there's one. Oh, this is a tournament. There might be one in here anyway. There might be a Hayward. No, not in the card shop, in the actual tournament.
Oh.
Like in the search bar up top. Yeah,
I can look at one from my shop if that's what you meant.
No. It has to be from the collection if you want, or on somebody's team. It may actually have to be on their active roster.
Sorry, did I misspell Hayward?
It might be Hay, H-E-A.
Yeah, I did.
Sure
okay.
It's H-E-Y. Yeah. Yeah, grab one of these. Just anyone.
Yep.
Okay. So there is on the card art the picture. It'll say number. It's not in the bottom corner.
No.
But it is on
but
the
it's
picture.
that's what I'm. No, that's right. But it's not in the place that you expect.
All right. So Koala raises another thing, saying he doesn't think if the whales aren't that dumb. I'm sorry, guys. They really aren't. And yeah, there'll be 1 or 2 people that buy
it's
every
in a different
LE.
place.
Right. But if you keep printing, like who is going to buy Chase Utley when Jackie Robinson is a card, unless they want it for a theme team or because they like Chase Utley for some demonic reason?
Sorry, is it Adolfo? It's not that it says the number for your own card. It's just like in the bottom right corner where that slash is. I just assumed that you were going to see a 2 and a 25 down there.
Right.
Because otherwise, what's that slash doing?
Right, but also if you're making 400,000 point cards for theme teamers, you're probably also missing the point, I think. But yeah, no, I mean if you're making these big cards that you want people to go spend money on, they should be good cards. I don't.
Power and toughness
that,
coming
to me
soon.
Is a major miss. Power and tough.
Yeah, so I think the problem is it makes me a little unsure kind of what we should be doing with this stream, because usually what we try to do is look at cards and say, should you go after this card? Is it going to be useful? But if now the answer is, depends when they change the game engine again in an unannounced way, there isn't such a thing as a good or bad card anymore.
Sorta. Yeah. I mean, I think McNoosh had a fair point, which is like, Is it really going to cost me that much that I can't replace all my gold and below rosters properly after the
I
update?
think you can replace your gold and below rosters, but
Huh.
but if you want to compete at the pointy end of stuff, you also need to be able to play some of the more expensive rosters. That's
Well,
part of what
that's
you're building
my
towards.
right. No, and I agree. And my issue for a long time has been I love League. If I had the option, I would probably never play a tournament. I don't really find it that fun. I know that's kind of a cold take around here. But I would much rather just play League. The problem is League is the most expensive format, and you make the least amount of money from it than literally every other format in the entire game. With the exception of PT Live, which makes you less money than Challenge Mode, unless you hit the leaderboard. So,
Right. So
um,
Koala, my understanding, I don't want to speak for Sporer on this, but my understanding is that they do decide before the beginning of the year what the plan is for releasing things. They may make some adjustments along the way, perhaps, but it's primarily something where they do have a plan and they do have a planned power creep. Uh,
I
yeah.
I do. That was true for Jardine. Jardine would have the entire content plan fleshed out a few months before the game came out. I don't know from Sporer. For some reason, I'm pretty sure there was a comment. I don't remember if it was after 24 was out or right before, where I think he said he had 2 or 3 months planned out. And maybe he's planned out the rest since then, but to me, that kind of led me to believe that was different this year.
Okay. I don't know. That's
I
something
don't
you
really
have. That's
either.
something you could ask Sporer.
Yeah.
But I suspect that even if sort of perhaps not every single card is known at this point, I can't imagine that they haven't at least figured out for all of the major cards what the plan is, when they're going to release them. Uh,
Right.
he
Yeah.
so he might have meant that they haven't decided, all several thousand cards that will still be released in some of the larger drops later. But I'm pretty sure they know like which Babe Ruths will be released and when, and things like that, and that would have been decided well before the start of the season.
Yeah, I think Peachy Spore did the milestone set last year and maybe a little bit before that. But
Yeah,
Jardine left at the start of 23, but left them the plan because, like I said, he had already planned the whole thing out, right? So it was
yeah,
roughly Jardine without some real time adjustments last year until probably like December.
yeah.
Um,
But that's
yeah, so
anyway.
I
That's
would
the
I
first
would
problem. Go ahead. Yeah,
Right. No, I mean I would agree. There's probably at least a rough overarching plan of what cards when and how that'll all look out, right? So
yeah.
um,
So I think yeah.
definitely some more there. But yeah, in general, I mean it still doesn't seem to line up, and that scares me almost as more as these engine updates that I hope are all public facing, but have not always been public
Well,
facing.
but what it says is that the engine updates are going to be paired with having to do it again. So the first problem is you can't predict what
Yeah.
the game looks like that you're trying to compete in. And
Hmm.
in particular, the thing that bothers me the most about this are the changes to strikeouts and home runs. Because if they came back and said, you know what, we've kind of finally concluded that just the pitcher BABIP model we implemented is unworkable and we're fixing it, that would have been the day one answer. So, okay, it took them a while to decide to do it, but they decided to do it.
Right.
But by responding to the strikeouts and home runs, that means what they're actually telling us is essentially we don't like the way you're choosing to play our game. You've chosen to respond to the current environment by going for low avoid K high power cards. We don't want you to do that, and so we're going to decide that the shape cards that we want to be playable need to be playable no matter what you prefer. And that's really scary, because what that says is that if after this engine change they decide, well, we really do need Jackie to be better than Volpe, there'll just be another one. And we don't have a way of figuring out when that's coming, which means we
Right.
don't have a way of doing long-term planning. And the whole key to this game has always been you have a choice between instant gratification and long-term planning. And if you really want to compete, it's really sort of instant gratification plus continuing to put resources into the game, or long-term planning. But what they've now told us is you can't do long-term planning. So that's the first problem. And then I think the related issue is the other way that often free-to-play players have been able to make up a little bit is in the market and something like live spec. And we didn't really have this discussion, I think, on this stream. Other streams have had some discussions there. I think it's fair to say that the live spec, at least the first time it went around, didn't cause players to move in the directions that we expected based on their major league stats in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And that's a problem because, yes, it's still fun in a meta-changing way if card values change somewhat randomly. It's still nice because, like, you get to react to new players. But if you have no way of doing a clever thing and trying to predict the direction things are going, you have no way of actually trying to compete in the game with skill. It becomes pure luck. And this has always been a game that's at least partly luck. Baseball is short-term luck. The difference between the best and worst teams, is, say in the playoffs, the best team, and like the team that squeaks in, it's probably a 10-game difference over the course of the season in a lot of cases, and you're playing a short series. There's always a lot of luck. Tournaments, even a best of 7, the gap isn't big enough that the better team always wins, and even more so for shorter series or round robins or something like that. But the idea has been that in the long run, this is supposed to be a skill game where you can use your skill and you can use your long-term planning and your built-up knowledge of the game to figure out how to be successful. And the problem with making changes which are unannounced, go in a direction that looks like they're reacting to the symptom when they have the cause in front of them, and appear to be punishing gameplay choices rather than sort of fixing the underlying issue. It's essentially saying the players are wrong, not the game.
Well, I think a greater point too, like piggybacking off of what you're saying, is maybe home runs and strikeouts were also wrong in the engine. The problem is if that blurb from Matt and that blurb from Dishnet is all we get, we'll never know. Well, we will know after we get another week or two of data and we can see if there's an overcorrection or not, right? And that's kind of the hard part. And I know a lot of people recently have been complaining about a lack of communication. But most games I play that have competitive environments, when you're changing the environment, you give exact numbers and you give exact reasoning and you say why it's changing and how, because people have invested their time and money into the game and they deserve to know why the changes are being made and to what degree they're being made. And I just really
you mentioned you're a League of Legends player, right?
Yeah, League of Legends has an update every 2 weeks that changes players, and they don't just say, "Oh, we gave this player more damage. Figure out where."
No, they'll tell you. I guess the one I'm more familiar with was Dota, but I think it's the same idea where it's like, in this patch, this is different by 10 pixels.
Yep.
Not 11 pixels, 10 pixels.
Right. And I think also in a game that's as statistically driven as Out of the Park, with a very, your market for this game is statistical baseball nerds. We would love to have the numbers. You know what I mean, right?
The dash just means they're mid laners.
Yeah, that's I've made that joke, Arcelus. It's an excellent joke. All LEs are just actually mid laners. Which means their role doesn't matter, and they should just roam and stop trying to deal damage in lane. But that's
not to mix games, but this is actually one of the things that I actually almost feel like some of this, this is how to play our game, is one of the reasons I ended up picking Dota over League when I got into this. Was that League seemed to be a little bit more in the direction of this champion should be used in this way, and if we find you're using it in a way that we don't anticipate, we're going to make changes until you use it in the way we want you to use it.
They've gotten a lot better with that, but that is something that's happened before. I'll answer JDA's question because I think it's a good question. Isn't it possible they just don't have whatever to do an in-season fix? They've always preferred Band-Aids. It is. The problem is what we're looking at right now, JDA, like very, to us, you know what I mean? There's a lot of smoke indicating that the fire in the kitchen is that they're looking at the observed stats and not fixing some underlying things, and they're almost correcting for what the players have identified as the solution to a problem they created, right? And then when we correct back, there's going to be this huge double down effect that's a problem.
I'll also just say, if it's clear to me with my reverse engineered version of the game engine what's happening, it should be much more clear to them. But if it really isn't, I would be very happy, and I'm not the only one. I'm sure some of the other people that do modeling would be very happy to help them fix what's under the hood in their game engine in return for being ineligible to actually compete in stuff for a while.
Yeah.
If they asked me like fix the game engine and in return like don't play competitively in 24, I would certainly do that and try to help out.
I would be on the same boat. Not that I would be as helpful, but I do think there's things I could offer as well, and I have offered before. I think.
So I don't think it's. But I also don't think this is as hard of a problem as it sounds. Like when I say that I've got a reverse engineered version of the game engine, I'm not talking about 10,000 lines of code.
Right.
When Chimera went on Kidneys stream, was it last night or the night before? Recently,
Wednesday night, nights ago. Yeah.
I won't speak for him, but he may well have had enormous numbers of lines of data.
Right.
But I will bet heavily that he had fewer than 1,000 lines of actual code. In manipulating that to do what he was doing.
Right.
And there's a good reason for that, which is when you write incredibly complex things, then anytime you change a little bit, you have to figure out how they all interact, and it becomes very difficult to figure out how to balance. Like I've actually been a game designer before for an online basketball game, a while ago that had similar properties to this, and we had exactly this issue that the more you try to add bells and whistles, the more you end up making it difficult to figure out how the things interact. And so when we would start upgrading our engine, we actually had to simplify, not complicate, in order to be able to have control over what was going on.
Right.
But that's essentially what happened. That's essentially what happened here. Is they took this game that was intended not to have pitcher BABIP, put pitcher BABIP in, but because it's not part of the way the rest of the model's built, then things break. Yeah, should they run a million sims pre-release? They certainly have the capability to run a million sims also. Or, they have a beta period anyway. Take a few of the really sharp tournament players and give them cards that aren't exactly the cards that are going to be released, so there's not exactly an advantage, but give them last year's player pool or something, but say this is our new game engine. Go beat each other up in a tournament for a week and tell us whether it works.
Yep. No. And that's like I don't even want to say like maybe they ran a million sims and what happened is different. Like, that happens in games a lot, and it's the reason why even some of the biggest game studios in the world have these massive public betas, not 3 days before, but months before their game is going to come out, right? Because then they can get a level of data they probably couldn't get internally testing, and they also have private groups testing of what should be some of the best, most competent players in the game, right, as well,
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I think the same was true in 23, that the beta also showed that there were issues with that BABIP environment, which...
Right.
You
Yeah, the
know,
bronze environment, like, that led to the batting apocalypse, right, where everybody was scoring 20 runs a game. And Izadafo's right. The problem is when the 3-day beta is 3 days in front of the game coming out. How are you supposed to change the engine when there's clear issues, right? Um, it's probably not possible,
right.
So
Well, or well, in this case, I think it could have been, but it would have been tight. Um,
yes,
you know, and I understand that there are those issues as well, but
yep,
I think that's the problem. So the problem is that the end result of all this is I think they're essentially telling us that trying to be clever and trying to make long-term planning work is just a big problem. Um, but if you can't do that, then that brings up two questions. First, how are we supposed to compete as free-to-play or even free-to-play plus players? And second, in a more practical sense, what should we be doing with this stream? If we can't come back and tell you that some cards are good and some cards aren't, and so forth, what do you actually want to see us do? Like, should we just sort of end the stream, or like, is there something that we can bring that still has some value if we don't have an ability to guess what cards are going to be good, past the next few days? Because this isn't going to be the last change.
right. And the question is, are they gonna, look at it? Because there's, I think, a pretty decent chance that there's immediate issues with this. Are they gonna band-aid it in 3 days, or are they gonna wait till it gets really bad in 2 months and change it again? And it's just kind of hard. Like, I think less of speculating on what and just saying that it's a really slippery slope we've opened things up to is kind of fair, with how the current change is going on. I think, Charles, regardless of like whether we ever rate a card again on this stream, I do think, at least even for me, I'll speak as somebody who, you look at the game in a very different way than pretty much everybody else. And I would love, personally, just, maybe we'll keep talking and not actually streaming, but like,
Yeah.
I think us just debating game theory and stuff would probably still have quite a decent audience.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we could try to do something like that, because I'm just thinking, what we had done in the past was we had focused on quicks, and there just aren't as many of these quick formats. By the way, answer another question in the chat about more slots to tournaments. You may not like my answer to that, but I'll give you at least what my answer would be. Some types of tournaments fill very quickly, and some don't. So I'll just pull out and take a look here at... Let's just take a look right now. Oh, apparently speaking of joining tournaments, I get to join a tournament.
I would also say, Kazkan, that adding more slots for tournaments below gold would make the problem worse, not better.
Yeah.
They would fill faster.
But
I
here,
do think...
So just looking now, I can join a
open.
bronze floor cap, which is an
open tournament.
It's an open. It's actually a pretty random format because it's only best of 3, which means it's easier to kind of compete. By the way, this is an example, where someone asked, where is a card like Grover Cleveland valuable?
Right.
This is a best of 3 series, so in that sense, it's it's pretty stochastic. But it's set in 1921. It's set in 1921, and so that means Grover Cleveland is literally throwing a minimum of a third of my games. But because they're all best of 3, it's also a tournament where it's really hard to get rest. And so there's a lot of value in winning a series in 2 games instead of 3. And so this is something where having that card actually brings a lot of value. Even though you might think, well, it's bronze floor cap, there are a lot of options, there are a lot of players, it's actually a big difference maker. Yes.
Yeah, I think the no-brainer... So a few more comments on tournament structure, right, from me that I've kind of observed. Izadafo's been advocating for a while, and I've been completely on board that why are wild cards just open era formats? Like, if they were actually like lower tier, higher floor, you know what I mean? Like really interesting, weird stuff, more people would play them. And then you could move the wild card formats into open where they kind of belong, and it would make open more interesting as well, I think.
Just to
I,
yeah, actually, just to show real quickly. So it's the case that some of these do fill well in advance, but a lot of them
mhm.
don't. And one of the things that I think is worth considering is if you're trying to compete against uh, if you're trying to compete against everybody else, instead of queuing for 8 hours for a silver, you probably will find more value out of queuing for pretty close to 0 hours. Play a bronze floor cap. You're going to be at a bit of a disadvantage at first, but you only have to win best of 3 series in order to cash in it. So that's much easier than winning a best of 7. And if you fail, just queue for the next thing. So you see there are a lot of places where you can queue without a lot of wait time, and it's generally the same ones over and over again. This OOTP era cap I think generally goes into quicks. I don't remember if Dead Ball to Boom quite goes into quicks, but I think it's usually pretty close.
Chat is asking, like, how do you compete against those cards if you're free to play? You absolutely can. Like, the most advantage you're probably ever having in an out of the park tournament, like best team, worst team, is like, I don't know, like 65-35. It's totally winnable. In a best of 3, it's more winnable. And in caps, it's also more winnable because all your bench players are the same bench players, right? And yeah, and I agree also with you, Padman, that there's zero in-game resources for how to play a cap properly or what actually happens in what era, right? The dead ball cap, right, is extremely accessible for literally any player, and it normally goes into quicks, right? The problem is just spending the time to learn, right?
Yeah. So Kaz can also, if you decide you want to construct a lineup for something like this, I'm happy to help you in DMs, or actually this could be a fun thing to do. I'd be happy to help you on stream too.
Yep.
You know,
So I mean, there's solutions. I think the game is a lot
yeah.
more accessible to people without a lot of good cards. Right. Like Chimera says,
Well,
60%
and
wins
also
for the best
bronze
teams.
especially. This bronze floor cap, I think, is particularly accessible because it's a low cap. And the nice thing
Yep.
about a low cap is you're not, yes, there are, even if I have every card in the game, which I certainly don't, but even if I have every card in the game, I can't use all of them.
Right.
So,
And
for
to
example, if
explain
I'm
to
running,
chat,
like I'm running Addy Joss and Grover Cleveland Alexander, but that also means those are 2 of my perfects. So if you look at my lineup for this as a build, I am only running this one perfect Mookie Betts
yep.
as a hitter because I don't get
Right.
to run everything in this cap. So how do you compete? Maybe what you do is you run a lot better lineup than mine. Because my lineup's not that good, so maybe you can find some pitchers that are going to do okay against it anyway. That's the
Yeah.
weakness of my team because I invested in the pitching.
And also, cap numbers are deceptive when there's a floor. Like 1875 is a big cap number, but bronze floor means every single card basically costs 20 more points on your bench, right? So
Yeah.
um,
So I think running gold lineups is a mistake.
right, you almost always want to play the best players on your starting lineup and the worst players on your bench. And if you just
Yeah.
spread it all out, it's going to be a pretty bad team, right?
Yeah, so one way to think about it is if you look at the overall that's listed on a card, there are 2 directions in which that overall rating ends up being wrong. And that's basically at the 2 extremes. Even
Yep.
if you were to rate a card that has 1s everywhere, that card will still be 40 overall.
Yep.
And even if you were to give a card max ratings everywhere, it'll be 100 overall. And so usually what that means is the way you get the most excess value is by having really good hundreds. So this is actually not a very well constructed roster. There's a reason I did it this way, and which I'm happy to mention on stream why I did it this way. Um, but I'll simply say if this were modern era, this is not what my roster would look like. I would be taking a lot of these cards in the middle and I would be replacing them with hundreds. Um,
Yeah.
there are two reasons my roster looks like this. The first practical one is, you know, again, I don't want to cry poor here because I do get a lot of points from tournaments. So compared with a lot of free to play players, I'm doing well. Um, but I don't have most of the best cards in the game. I've had to pick and choose. By getting Grover Cleveland, I don't have James Wood, who would be, your best hitter. I don't have a
Right.
card like Volpe. I didn't invest in getting Jackie. You know, like that's kind of the trade-off.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so
Taskin
that's one
too, it
reason.
also
Yeah, go ahead.
it becomes a lot of like, yeah, Manny is a huge upgrade. A-Rod's probably a downgrade. Pearsall and Johan are okay. I think Pearsall will get a lot better on Monday. Um, the thing is, right, like, um,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
Bet's absolutely.
once you
Bet's is not a good.
once you stop spending points on like incremental kind of upgrades and like you just leave the league team, let it kind of cook and get upgraded by buying other pieces, and you start buying cards to make you more money in tournaments, that is how you succeed as a free-to-play player. And the number one mistake people keep making is, I have 35k, I need a shortstop on my gold league team, who am I buying, right? Because you can play the game that way, but if you want to be a competitive player, you will never win doing that, ever, right?
Yeah. So I think there's a second bit of philosophy in here, and this is the other thing that you can do as a team with weaker cards, that almost no one else is doing. So as much as I have these good pitchers, I've built this particular roster, understanding that I'm still outclassed. But what I can do is I can aim for a scenario in which my roster becomes better. Um, so part of the thinking here is this is a relatively small cap, and I've tried to create a little bit deeper bench than you normally get in a small cap because I don't have the high-end cards anyway. Thinking that, there are a lot of 3-game series in this format because it's only best out of 3. There's a
Yep.
good chance that to win this, everybody's going to have to play series where you come in with very little rest. And if you have no rest for, 3 series straight, you're going to have to get deep into your bench. And basically planning on being able to win game 3 of the second series in a row in return for everything else. But yeah, I agree. You don't want to spend 40k on a card that might get worse. What you want to try to do is you want to ask, can I spend 40k in a way that I will get cards that bring 40k back very quickly?
Yep.
That's the way I think about it. So who are cards that don't cost necessarily a lot, but play in a lot of formats and are a big advantage over not having the card? So I'll give you an example. If we think about some of the gold ones, one of the things that's crazy to me right now is that if you look at, say, historical golds, let me just look at all of the historical golds that are for sale and are not in missions. So we'll go down a little bit. Look at all of these gold cards that are selling for basically nothing over a quick sell. And a lot of these are pretty close to meta cards or even absolute meta cards. I don't know. Kidneys, you have a good example? I can try to. Like
Yeah,
you
I
mentioned
mean, I
this
think there's a lot
Niedenfuhr.
of-
I think you had Niedenfuhr as your best pitcher, right?
I do. I mean, it's with the caveat that he's bad VL and then just so crazy versus righties. He'd probably still good, but like, I think Bubbles Hargrave is a card that like could be very good post Monday. Slim plays in a few things. Before on the screen, you had Bagwell a little higher up.
Oh yeah,
that
Bagwell.
most certainly is playable, right? And
But like Niedenfuhr as an example, the way I would think about it is, let's imagine you're playing a lot of gold.
Mm-hmm.
and this is the best gold reliever in the game right now. Yeah, eventually he'll
Yep.
move down the list, or probably on Monday he'll move down the list with the game engine change. But ignoring the game engine change, and this is kind of the point about the game engine change. If I ignore the game engine change, what I'm going to look at this card and say is, okay, what is it worth to me to have the best reliever in the game? Well, let's say that I'm spamming gold quicks, and maybe I'm not like doing it every single time. Yeah, oh yeah, Bill Joyce is an incredible card. He's cheap,
Mm-hmm.
right? Oh yeah, this card is 1.6k. Okay,
Yep.
if you're really diligent with a buy order, you'll probably get him for 1,500 points if you put it up and wait a little bit. Okay, um, and this is close to the best bat in the game in the current meta. Your Chipper's now probably better, but you can still DH him. Um,
Yep.
so, what is it worth to add the best batter in gold to my gold roster if I don't have him? Well, the answer probably is, let's say I'm spamming gold, but not really like every single time. I'm not playing 50 tournaments a day. Maybe I'm playing 10 tournaments a day. I'm spamming gold, but I'm not constantly at my computer or something. Um, what is it worth to go from a mediocre bat to the best bat in the game?
Right.
Quite possibly, a pack a day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that pack's already 1,000 points, isn't it? So that
Plus
means
two.
if you don't have Bill
You.
Joyce, he's paying for himself within a couple days probably. So you should buy Bill Joyce.
Also, do caveat. Standard packs are normally around 1,000. Sometimes they're a little lower. A lot of the higher tier packs are not quite worth at all what their sticker price would suggest. So
That's true.
don't just say, "Oh, I won 3 diamond packs. I won 45K." No, you didn't.
No, right now
Not
if
even
you won
close,
three
right?
diamond packs, you probably won like 20k or something.
Right.
It'll be a little more when some of the diamonds end up in, yeah.
Yeah. Just something to be mindful of.
But the point is, that's the way I'm looking at it. So if I had 40k to spend, actually, I'll tell you exactly what I would do with my 40k.
Okay.
One of the just basically cards that have a bunch of copies but are not yet in missions are remarkably cheap right now.
Mhm.
And to me, the format that means normally will be expensive to get into, but right now isn't, is low diamond.
Yeah.
Where not a lot of people are playing it because they think it's expensive, and it will be expensive eventually, but right now it's not. So, for example, I don't know, Kidneys. Who would be like your key, some of your key low diamonds that you might think about?
The example I've used multiple times, not maybe, I mean, definitely not after Monday, but like up
Actually,
until now, the card I've made,
Go ahead.
the card I've made so much money off is on the bottom of your screen. It's Bob Allison. I mean,
Oh
Bob
yeah, oh yeah.
Allison.
This card, I have this
Yeah,
card as just the best corner outfielder in low diamond right now.
right. And not only is he like he
He can play
plays
center if you
three
want.
outfield
Yeah,
spots and first base and bats really well, and he'll cost you 9K. He cost me 10K when the game came out, right?
right.
So again, like, these are the kind of the things where, like, you could go buy a Bob Allison and probably pay him on 6 or 7 different daily tournament teams right now, right? Something crazy,
Absolutely.
So
Looking at and looking at a few others, you know. So yeah, that's a good point. So the future legend pictures that just came out normally would be slightly dissuading, but there are dead ball type low diamonds, right? Is 1933 the low diamond, or is it 1919?
1990, the low diamond cap is true dead ball. It's pre 1920.
Yeah. So if you want to build a low diamond cap team, you can build a low diamond cap team for well under 40K that is super competitive.
Yep.
And there are other cards that kind of right now only play in that format. So I'll give you an example. My best right fielder in that format, where did he go? Is he actually even cheaper? He's even cheaper. Is this guy.
Yep.
You're getting him
He's
for
great.
7. You're getting a guy that has a quick sell value of 4K, and probably will eventually be in a mission, so you're not really hurting yourself. You're getting him for
Oh,
7K, and this is probably right now your best right fielder in a dead ball low diamond. And I guess he gets better with the update because he's a BABIP heavy
in
guy.
in theory, this card is very, very good after the update. Yes.
Um, yeah, that's right. In 1999 low diamond, that's right. You can run a Robin Roberts in the rotation or something like that.
Harvey Haddocks or Dave McNally, and then like even Mission Edition Louis Tiant is pretty
Yeah.
solid. So like, yeah, I mean, it costs almost nothing to play that tournament, and it's very fun. Um,
So I think that's what you would do, except that this whole discussion comes back to the point we started with, which is this is exactly the question I'm always asking. It's exactly the question Kazkan asked. I've got 40K. What should I do with the 40K to improve my team? And the answer that most people come up with is buy a not quite meta card for my league team that doesn't help in the long run. That's not a good answer. The second best answer is, buy a card that's going to help in a tournament for a little while where I can't win the tournament anyway. That's also not a great answer, but it's a little bit better. But I think the best answer is buy 40K worth of cards that are going to be enough of a difference that it lets you win more than that 40K back in tournament values. I see everybody just started buying flicks. See, we really should be hawking cards on this stream. Clearly,
I don't hawk cards. I don't sell my spreadsheet. I'm not here to make money. I know
yeah.
you're not either.
No, 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 I'm not.
As much as you might be tempted to be.
No, but there are a few. I'll give you, but looking at a bunch of these, okay, this Dolph Camilli,
Yep.
is
Right.
Rudy York better? Well, slightly, but
Yeah.
actually, if you go far enough back into Dead Ball, this card starts to beat York.
Yeah.
So
It
this
might beat York after Monday as
it
well.
might beat York
because
after
it's got a lot of
Monday.
BABIP.
But you're
Yep,
going to get this
that's
card for 7K.
No, there's a lot. You could build probably a very competitive, and probably not high diamond because that involves so many future legends. But like low diamond hitters are very accessible.
Yeah,
Low
I
diamond
think
pitchers,
you could build low diamond hitters for. I think you could build a competitive low diamond team absolutely for 40K. I mean, actually, the funny thing is the most expensive guy on my low diamond team was a middle reliever. Mainly.
Are we talking low diamond cap or low diamond?
Yeah, I
Big
don't think I
difference.
ran one in low diamond cap because it's
Right.
early era.
Who is your middle reliever?
But I ended up convincing myself. Oh, is it the lack of sell orders? Is that the problem? Been told there's now pronounced Dukeshire.
Interesting. I
That
don't know.
this is actually the card I spent the most on just when I was building a team. And he's not expensive, but this was actually the one I spent the most on because everybody else was even cheaper. And yeah, if you've got all these cards, Iridescence, you can make it. You absolutely can make a competitive low diamond team.
Right. The slight caveat is that probably my low diamond rotation includes all 4 of the future legends that run from 30 to 55K each. But
Yeah, I think the modern low diamond, the future legends dominate, but the low diamond cap. Here's the thing: if you're this is the way I would advise doing it. If you want to get into a format, you want to get into the format for 40K, not 100K. The way you get into the format is you start by playing the caps, because you can play the caps if you have some meta cards, but not all of them. And then you use that to use the prizes to kind of build up your resources, and then eventually you'll acquire some of the ones and fill in, and you'll start playing the open low diamond as well. But you start by getting into the cap, because just getting a few key cards to play the cap is enough that you can compete and bring the value back. And the great thing about this low diamond is that people do seem to be a little bit scared of competing because the individual cards should be more expensive and all that. But what it means is I don't have to queue very long. This daily bronze floor cap, okay, now it just filled, a few minutes before it launched. If you want to play the OOTP era cap, that one probably also will be future legend heavy. But you notice 30 minutes before launch, there are still 21 spots. You want to play the low diamond cap we just talked about? I don't know exactly what time this will fill, but it's certainly not going to be more than 2 hours before launch. What does it fill? Maybe an hour, hour and a half before launch? Something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
And it's also, in many ways, an easier PCTS qualification for some of these. Like some of the wild card, if you look last time at the wild card standings, is there no good scroll wheel? Is there a scroll somewhere? There it is.
I think if you click, you might be able to drag it.
It's just hidden, yeah. Okay, but if you look at the cutoff, you needed 8 points in a good tiebreaker or 9 points to qualify. So that means you could literally play one tournament, make the semifinals, that's it for the month, you're in the PTCS.
Yeah. That was definitely, and it's going to be a lot harder this time. I've seen a lot more people
I think
playing.
It'll be harder because more. Okay, why is there another baseball team in here?
I don't know. Someone got They did a ban wave. A lot of people got taken out.
Oh well, actually, looking at their username, I can see why, and the username probably should also be banned. So maybe I should take that off screen.
I don't know what that means. But I'll take your word for it.
If you spoke Japanese, you would decide that should probably be banned.
Ah, I see.
Okay, and I guess they've already been baseball teamed. Anyway, yeah, so I do think that's the problem, though, is because there's always the calculation I'm doing. So, they released a bunch of these new limited edition cards, okay? And some of them are better than others, clearly, but every single one of them is going to be expensive. Like if I'll just pull up a card shop again. But every single one of these 25, limited editions. Oh, I ended up in Astor's League. I'm probably getting smashed, aren't I? Astor's team is definitely on the strong end.
A little bit.
So yeah, you look at these cards. They're all going to be expensive if you want to buy one.
Yep.
Maybe not Bill Terry as much, but even Bill Terry, you're going to spend $80K. So the question I'm always asking. Sorry, go ahead.
I will say, I ran some napkin math on that Ed Delahanty. I'm very convinced after Monday that's the best first baseman in the game, and nothing is remotely close. But maybe I'm wrong.
That looks, yeah. Well, I'm not convinced of anything until I have an idea of what the engine actually looks like.
Yeah, if the engine gravitates towards league play, it will not be close.
Is he good enough? You run him at second base?
No, because hopefully defense matters a lot more. Soria for 330 is nuts. I mean, I have him being a top pitcher. I just wouldn't spend 330 on a top reliever. That sounds crazy.
Well, but Soria is actually a really good example of where I'd be most worried. So if you look at this, is this card worth 330K? Well, let's suppose that this card is as good as Joe Barry was at release. Let's suppose you decide that this card is actually just half a run better than any other reliever in the game. Okay? Yeah. I'm not going to talk about where that's realistic because the game engine's about to change, but let's suppose you believe that's true. Is he worth 330K? Well, what is the best reliever in the game worth in terms of bringing value back?
Not much, because the only
Maybe
formats they play in are Open or League, right?
they play Open, they play League, but at the same time, OOTP era is a really good era for cards. There's
It's
a
true.
weekly, there are a bunch of dailies. Um, like there are some cards that fall in a gap. Like I think like 1992 was particularly bad last cycle. It just didn't play in anything somehow. This card plays in all sorts of formats. So maybe you could work out that this card is going to get you, I don't know, 5 to 10k in value a day on average. Because especially if you already have a strong team that this pushes over the top, then the marginal value of adding one more card goes way up. Just because sort of going one extra round in a tournament, makes a bigger difference. Um, so let's say you get 5 to 10k in value out of this card. Should I pay 330k for a card that's going to give me 7,500 points a day? Absolutely not. It's going to take me a couple of months to build that up. What
Charles
should
has
yeah
just described you have just described the PT Live model, except the cards cost 30k instead of 300. But yes.
yeah all right. So what should I pay? What should I pay for what should I pay for a card that I think will bring me let's say 5,000 points a day? Well,
Right.
not nothing either, because that means I'm getting 35k a week. I'm also getting, a little bit of qualification for tournament leaderboards and stuff. So if I think he's going to stay in the meta for the next 2 months, and I think for the next, month he's going to bring me 35k a week and then it'll start to go down, I probably would spend 100k for a card like that.
Well,
I wouldn't for this
also you
card
have
because I
to.
don't think he's as good as we're talking about. But, if he were that good, I would spend
I would.
100k
I would
for a card
also
like that.
clarify. It also matters the gap between this card and the other card.
That's why I
And
said if
I
he's
would.
like, let's say he's half a run better than anybody else. Let's say he's a really
Oh
like
well,
the
that half
best
a run over what though?
over your
Because
second
he's a
best card.
reliever.
Over your second
No,
best
but
card.
am I doing per like 950 or am I doing
Sorry,
per like 300?
half a
Because he's
run
an
of ERA, let's say.
Oh, okay. No, I wouldn't spend 100k.
So I think
If
that's
the other card was like 20k, there's no way. Not even close.
yeah. I think if I could get 5k a day from him on average, then maybe 100k max, but I'd try to go under that.
Yeah.
Like I would have spent 100k on Barry at the beginning of the game if I had 100k to spend on a card like that, because I would have got the value back. But now the problem is, if what you say is, do you want to spend money on this card, but we're about to change the game engine and we're not going to tell you when or how, but we might change the game engine. Well, now the answer is absolutely I can't. Because if I've sunk all of my points into kind of this being a key card, and if the card gets nerfed, I've wasted all of these resources, then I just can't take that risk.
Well,
You
and on
know,
top of that, right? I think this is a good conversation to talk about chase cards as well. I keep hearing
you want me to
people
bring up
talk
Utley?
about. No, I'd like Delahanty. I mean, actually, Utley's fine because here's the thing: people keep talking about at the end of the game they want a bunch of different cards to be chase cards. That's kind of crazy to do. Like, yeah, okay, Utley says he's a perfect, and there's only 25 of them, and he's really rare. But if I'm trying to win, I am always playing Jackie, literally almost always, and I
I'll play
don't know
Volpe.
why I would.
But
Why?
yeah.
Well, right now, but like Monday, you're probably playing Jackie again, and I think, to me, it's not. This isn't a chase card just because it's shiny and rare. It's just a bad card, and if you want him for a theme team or whatever, sure, like all power to you. But there's no like. There's really no reason for me to ever want this card in my collection competitively.
Unless they introduce injuries.
Yeah, and I'm not quite sure what people are talking about. Like, yeah,
Sorry.
you can have a second baseman that's better, that has more power, and one that's a contact hitter and one that's a glove. And you could probably make those three profiles be relatively balanced. And then outside of that, where are you getting more chase cards at the same position that are going to be comparable? Ah, this guy has 100 bunt, but that guy has 100 base running. Like, it doesn't really work that way, or you're just printing the same copies of cards, right? So,
Yeah. So
the
Kaz
end
can.
of the
Sorry,
day,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
at the end of the day, one card is always, almost always going to be better than another card, and that card, because we can have basically enough copies as we need, is the chase card, right? It doesn't really matter if the card is shiny. So,
Right. Yeah, well, as we saw at the end of last cycle, if it turns out that kind of the only card people are missing is a very marginal improvement, but it's the only improvement available, then it's a million point card that becomes a 2 million point card that becomes whatever more because there's nothing else to go for.
right.
Um, so yeah, Kazkin, we're happy to help you set up a cap team. Probably better to DM us on Discord or something.
Yep.
Uh, you know, yeah. Yeah, well, Grover Cleveland is valuable because, well, it's Josh with a different name. In the current engine, Grover Cleveland's also probably a fair bit better than Josh.
Yeah. No, it's very different for pitchers, right? Because if I could play 5 copies of Addy Joss, every additional copy I can play of Addy Joss is worth actually more money if they're like 25s of, right? So that's
Exactly.
very different. But in terms of a second baseman, you're just going to play the best one. And the second best one has basically no value because you shouldn't be wasting your money or maybe even spending more money on a worse card, right? Unless it's for an alternate reason. So,
Yeah. So, anyway, I think this is kind of where we're trying to figure out is there something we can do with the stream that is going to have value here if we're not really able to figure out what cards are going to hold value. Um,
mhm.
like what is it we should be doing? You know, we can always ask what is the answer in the current game engine, but the funny thing is that doing so is actually counterproductive because what the developers have now just told us is that if we all start to do something clever and strategic and make good decisions, the the game engine will be changed so that those decisions now become nerfed.
Right.
That's the
And I
problem, is
think,
that's the message we've been given. So in that environment, what do we do?
yeah, so I think um, probably a lot of the things we could start covering are like, game fundamentals, game theories, things for us, that we do that most people may not think to do because, again, uh, there isn't really a guide of like the question in chat. I have money and I do well in bronze quicks. How do I progress? Or how do I win at perfect drafts? Just like really basic stuff that's not necessarily like this card is way better, but this is how you should play the game to be better at the game. Maybe is what to do.
Great.
It's kind
And
of
then
my
try to
two
answer that
comments.
question a little bit. This is a really tough time to ask it because
Mm-hmm.
normally I would tell you what you want to do is use that 170k to build meta teams for a few of these daily formats that have nicer prizes than the bronze double elimination. First off, you've already done the really hard part, which is you've figured out without much of a guide how do you join tournaments, how do you build something that's going to be successful, and how do you tune something that's going to keep being successful as the meta changes. And all of those skills carry over to other formats.
Right.
Um, so what you want to do is ask yourself now in a targeted way, what are the formats where spending 170k is going to bring back the ability to get more value so that I have even more value to then get into every format. 170k is enough to pick and choose some formats, but it's not enough to jump into every single format competitively all at once. The cards are too expensive if you try to do everything. So you
Right.
want to find some formats that you like playing where you can afford to kind of build a meta team. Um, Normally, what you would do is you would start to go up in progression because as you go up, silver's more expensive than bronze, gold's more expensive than silver, etc. But I think if I had 170K to spend, I would actually avoid gold. That because of the gold quicks, I think gold is the place that managers have done the best job of optimizing their rosters right now. And so, with some work, you're going to be able to get to a 50% win rate in gold, but it's going to be really hard to do much better than that, uh, just because everybody's focused on gold. So I might look at some of these low diamonds like we're talking about, and maybe instead of just taking 40K and building low diamond cap rosters, think about also getting a couple of the future legends to just build a great low diamond roster. Um, like as best I can tell, that's what like Value City Viffers did, was just sort of focus on diamond, start by finding the right cards, and then once you have all of the right cards, you're winning at a high enough rate that you're taking in enough to keep getting more. Um, what's a good percentage of reaching the fourth round? Depends on the tournament format. Um, randomly, you're not expecting to do it more than 1 out of 8. So anything above 1 out of 8 means that you're having more success than the average player. Um, yeah. Anyway,
Well,
yeah,
perfect traps are a lot harder to squeeze margins, and there's always margins to squeeze. But if you're not constructing your own roster, it limits it a little bit, right?
Oh yeah, sorry, Coach Ruffy. When I said 50% win rate, I mean you should be winning 50% of your games essentially, so that you're as good as the typical team you face.
Right, right,
Um,
right. When normally in win rates, it's not really good to track actual win rate. You want to track game win rate because if you're winning your games, and you have proper fatigue set up, like you'll win with time and sample. Baseball's such a random game. Out of the park reflects that. You just need to play the long game. If you actually have the best team, you will win the tournaments, right?
yeah,
So.
yeah. Um, I think also if you're finding that you kind of make deep runs and then start losing to the same builds over and over, then it's a good idea to kind of look at what are the differences between your builds and those, because probably what that means is you're doing a good job building a roster, but there are one or two key cards maybe that are a difference. Yeah, so I think 55% game win rate is a really good early goal in most formats. That's what I was saying, is that the exception for me right now is especially gold, because gold is just something that so many strong managers have put a lot of effort into optimizing, uh, that anything over 50% is a really good number. And to me, what that actually says is I just don't want to play gold. Um, I think I can do a better job of using my tournament slots by finding something where the competition isn't as good and I can do better than a 50% win rate. Uh,
Right.
you
And
know,
gold being
yeah.
random is probably partially my fault. Sorry, guys, if you liked gold.
Um,
Um, there
you
is
know,
a little bit of a snowball effect when I tell people what are the best cards to play for a format,
yeah,
with
and
kind
I
of the
think you
level of
can,
making a sheet works,
I do think you can
uh,
find edges. Yeah, so I think a stream showing you how to track tourney data, that would be a really useful thing. Uh, that's completely the wrong stream for us here because this is kind of a no data stream by design. The way we do it. But there are a lot of other good streams that. And by the way, hopefully everyone that kind of is watching our stream also watches some of the other weekly streams that do tournament stuff. I think I saw
yep,
Christophorus in here before. If you want to kind of give them a link to your stream, that's a really good one. They do
I'll
nice
get it.
daily stuff, and they're really thoughtful, especially about caps and era settings and how to adjust your builds when you don't just get to pick your best league cards. Yeah, thanks
All
a
right.
lot. Um, yeah. Okay. Well, we can keep thinking about this. do we want to talk about any cards at all this week before we?
We can all rate all the cards really quickly. If you just want to grab that Dillinger rating and bring it down across all the cards, I think that's pretty
Yeah,
sufficient.
I think the real answer is that yeah, most of them are going to be question marks because we just don't know what the engine looks like. Um,
Yep. You want to just
sure, I'll give them all
drag that
question
down there.
marks.
It will be the fastest rating in history of Warbot TBD, and nothing will ever come close.
I will say though that there's one other thing I want to mention. There's one other thing I want to mention in here, as far as kind of what worries me about the direction this is going, which is we got this PT Plus reward, which was a batch of 12 gold tournament cards. And this was clearly intended to be like a reward that people would like, right?
Yep.
And the way it was explained, as I understand it, is that these are going to be tournament cards from the next batch. So that means these are cards that should be overpowered right now because they're designed to be very strong. Let's say they release the next batch a few weeks from now or something. They should be very strong at release because a lot of them have to be able to hold up for probably 2 or 3 months, given how long this tournament batch has gone. So these cards have to hold up even after a bunch of power creep. So these are all gold cards. So you've got, a gold sheet and a bunch of ratings.
Yep.
Do you have any of these cards as being a meta choice even right now?
Right now, the only one that's close is I think you could probably play Dode in center. Other than that, no. Speculating on Monday, there's a few names I think are very interesting. I know a lot of people took Eddie Collins. I think that card is terrible. Do not play that card at second base. And then, is it really DH level? I don't think so. Don't play that card. Teddy Higura is like gold pitcher number 13. He's also starting pitcher number 7 or 8. So, like, he's not really good enough, in my opinion, but maybe you make a worth for him. Dickey has a lot of potential if you're not a framing run believer, which Charles and I kind of thought was legitimate. We touched on it in our our pre-stream hour-long talk. Dickey probably is pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look. So I mean, just looking quickly at where I have those, at least in the current engine. So Higuera, depending upon what your stamina cutoff is for a starter, I've got Higuera either 6th, 7th, or 8th as a starter. So similar range to you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, like, obviously if you don't have all the cards, sure, he's not...
Dickey...
Not quite there.
Yeah, Dickey I have as just completely unplayable because the problem is... So the problem is this, even if you want to treat Dickey as a glove first catcher. Let's suppose you want to. Let's suppose that's what you want to do with this Dickey card.
Also, while you're doing that, Slinky, the thing is with certain cards can be excellent cards and hit below Mendoza. It really doesn't actually affect their value too much. Like, this card is never supposed to hit. He's supposed to be the best catcher glove in the game. So if you're playing him, don't expect him to hit above the Mendoza. He probably won't. And he still could be good, right?
Right. But here's the
here's
the problem with Dickey.
The
problem with Dickey is what you're playing him for is the 108 catcher ability, and clearly not the bat, right?
Yep.
But Romo has a significantly better bat, and isn't that far behind in the catcher ability. I mean, Romo's bat's also awful.
So, if I wanted to do that, Charles, I'm probably just playing Petway. If I'm playing the good glove,
I would rather
play.
I think I'd probably rather play Petway there, or maybe a more offensive catcher. But the problem is, even if you decide that Dickey's the right shape, I guess I guess there's one other advantage Dickey... No, I was going to say the other advantage Dickey has is he's a lefty, but Romo's a switch hitter.
I still think there's a world in where I don't think I ever play Romo. I think it's Dickey and Petway exclusively would be my take, actually. I don't think Romo's bat, if I'm believing that much in catcher ability, Romo's bat is not a bigger delta than 7 more ability. I can't see it. Could be wrong, but...
Probably, yeah, at least not in Modern. Yeah, I mean, and of course, at the moment, you're still looking pretty heavily at... well, of course, if strikeouts get nerfed, but there are more balls in play, then I guess catcher ability becomes more important, but not as much as you would have expected. But okay, anyway, so that one. What else was it? Yeah, Collins. I don't even quite have in the top 10 right now at second base. So Paskert. I think in a previous stream we tried to figure out if he was Dode or Doty, and ended up just deciding to call him George.
Dode is like, it's an insult from back then. The thing is, he would like sign like baseballs and his signature as Dode, so he took it. That was really his name that he used.
So like Lady Baldwin was an insult because he like didn't smoke or drink and like tried to stay in shape.
Exactly. What a dumb guy.
So Paskert right now I have as third in center field. But the problem is, you always point out, is that if you're third best at your position, you're unplayable now, and you never get better, you only get worse, unless they change the game engine, which is why he's got a question mark by him.
But I also think, depending on how you evaluate defense, Paskert could easily be the best center fielder right now. So I don't think it's that black and white.
Yeah, that's fair. But the problem is, these are cards that have to hold up several months from now. So that means one of two things. Okay, either for whatever reason they decided to give the community, because they did say it was a curated set of gold tournament cards. So either they carefully decided to give the community the 12 worst gold tournament cards, because they just wanted us to have something to quick sell the same way, which reminds me, if we're going to auction off cards, I will say, if anybody on stream wants a PTCS Smoltz, make me an offer that's more than 1,001 points and it's yours.
I'll give you 1,000 too.
Deal.
All right, let's do it.
What is he? What is he? Wait. How is somebody offering 15,000 points for this card?
There was somebody looking for him for a theme team, but aren't there, wasn't there 80 of these printed? I think there's 80 of them.
You know what?
I'm shocked that he would be worth that, but...
You know what? Here you go. Whoever really wants 15,000 for a Smoltz, congratulations, you have a John Smoltz.
That's not bad.
Weird. Okay. Hopefully it went to a theme team that really wanted him or something, and not somebody that thought this was a playable card.
Good card. There's Ben Sheets Jr. That's all I'll say on the subject.
Yeah. Yeah, if they nerf BABIP enough, the problem is I think the card still probably isn't good enough. But yeah,
they would have to directly nerf pitcher BABIP and not just BABIP, right? And it's a very different thing based on what happens, right?
But in a way that meant control still mattered, so it's an era. Yeah, it's just not a good card. So I think that's the problem. Is either they gave us a carefully selected set of the 12 worst gold tournament cards, or they really think this set of cards is supposed to be able to play several months from now in the models they have.
Well, and I would also, my assumption would be that these cards were probably made without reflecting changes and stuff. It's an excellent comment hit streak that I will not say. But
technically this Smoltz card does reflect change, but it's a 38 change and a 14 change.
Right now in gold, I'm probably just playing Joey Weimer. If I want a little bit more of a glove, I'll play Franklin Gutierrez, which I still have in the model is slightly better than Dude VL.
And if you want a bat, just play Hack or Beltron or
No,
something.
if you're going bat, you're going Matt Kemp, baby. Hell yeah. No glove zone, Matt Kemp.
Um, but but this is kind of the problem. Is I think there are two things that the developers have done in one announcement, which is where I get stuck. In order for any community in any game like this to work, you need trust between the players and the developers. And I think they've broken the trust in two ways here. The first is kind of making a really substantive change in the value of everything without communicating it in a way that let people plan appropriately, and in a way that just says, oh, and we're going to continue to look, so we might do this again. And the second is making a change that kind of clearly demonstrates they still don't have this ability to figure out what's wrong and therefore how to fix it. And they should know more about the game than everybody else, so that's really troubling. And I think it's troubling kind of on all, for everybody. That is to say, the other thing, I also feel bad for all of the people that create content and then the content kind of doesn't match the game engine. It's a lot of work to create content, and there are a lot of fun things that have been put together that then just don't work with the game engine. Or for that matter, all of the community people that are trying to figure out how to sell this.
I will say, my issue really personally isn't entirely with the change as much as it is for you, right? My issue is that they could have seen after one day or even after the beta that this was a problem. And we did tell them pretty much immediately that it was a problem. And the first communication we got on it was a month and a half later, right? And had they said on day 1 or 2, hey, we know this is a problem, we'll fix it in a month and a half, 2 months, right? That's our time frame, right? I would have been zero issue.
I still would have felt they should have been able to fix it quicker, but I would have felt that was entirely fairly communicated.
Right. And I also think that, for example, it's been 12 days now since the live update, and not a word about it, right? And, but right, I'm not here to talk about Garrett Cole not going perfect. He was never going perfect. Chat, gotta chill on that. The issue is there were issues with the live update, and the question is, how does that in fact affect future live updates? Are they fixing those bugs, or could they keep happening?
Right.
Not a single word.
So that is to say, when you say issues,
right?
Go ahead.
Right. Just say it, right? You either say, there's a bug in our system, we're fixing it, and then describe how the cards that were affected will change in the next update, right? Just radio silence is such a bad thing for everybody playing the game. I'm sorry, it is.
And when you say there are issues, to be clear, what you're really referring to is that there are some players where if you just look at their major league stats, we've kind of been told that what should be happening is that over time, the update should make the stats on the ratings on the live card move more and more towards the actual major league performance. So you start with some projected performance, and as cards get updated, they move more and more toward their major league performance. And what we found is that the problem is that it's not a question of significant moves. It's a problem that, for example, there are players that gave up.
Jose Urena gave up 9 home runs in 18 innings and then gained 14 points a pitcher home run, right? They were just wrong. There's no way to justify him preventing more home runs in game when he gave up a home run every other inning in 18 innings. That's crazy,
Right.
right? And that is not the only example. There's lots of examples. I've posted bug reports. I've talked about them. There has not been a single response on it, right?
Right.
So
Oh, nice. It pulled a Grover. So if someone got a Grover from a drop pack, then we've done something useful for the community here. Uh,
congrats, dude. That's incredible.
that's a really nice pull, and yeah, that's a great card.
Hmm.
So I think the problem is when we say that, when Kidneys is saying it looks broken. Um, it could be that it's broken. It could be that it's the kind of thing like I had in my model where just, I went to import data, some formatting thing was off, and so therefore, the stats didn't quite get imported to match Major League stats or something. This stuff is going to happen. But the problem is going forward, what you want is you want the live updates to be predictable, because this is a way that free-to-play players can speculate on cards going up and sort of make some points. Um, and it's the same thing with generally long-term strategy needs to be predictable. And that's what I mean about kind of this trust. That the idea is, as players, what we're doing is we're sort of telling the developers, we trust you to give us a game that's going to be predictable, let us make long-term plans, and that you're going to kind of keep it fun. And when you make arbitrary decisions, it certainly stirs things up, but you kind of lose that trust. You lose this idea of sort of saying, I should invest my time in long-term planning because the game designers have made a promise that it's going to pay off, and I trust them I trust that promise.
Right. If something changed to the way that live spec works, and it does not work how we've been told it works, they need to clarify that. If it's not, a bug, there's a difference. Maybe there's both, right? I do think we deserve to know. And yeah, I posted an official bug report. You can go look at it on the forums. There isn't a reply, right? And I followed up on it. They're out of the park is aware there are issues. They have chosen not to comment for whatever reason.
Well, or at least they're aware that the projections most people were making based on Major League stats didn't match the actual live update. It may be that this is the way it's intended to work, but I do think it would be helpful to get that information so that we, in other words, if they were to tell us, look, we're not going to tell you how we do our live updates, but the live update worked the way it was intended to, and the same thing is going to happen next month. What would happen
I would never live spec again, but that's okay. That's fine, right?
You might never live spec again, or what I think would more likely happen is the community would start putting a lot more effort into figuring out what exactly did happen and making better projections next time. Like I said, I'm a scientist. The way I think about models, including my own here, is not they're right, but they're predictive until they stop being predictive. And when you discover that they're not predictive, you go adjust them. You learn something. So if the live update doesn't match our model, maybe the answer is we need to learn something.
It's one of those things
or maybe
where
it's a bug. And that's where it would be good to get communication.
If Jose Urena and Connor Joe are working as intended and not either a bug or there was like an initial re-rate of the card halfway through the month because they changed something in the database and they lost a lot of rating and then gained more, they lost and then gained or gained and then lost, right? Something had to be different for those cards to change the way they did. So it's
right.
Obviously, it was not the way it's always worked in the past, and
right.
I do think we have a right to know. I think it's a lot of people's money and time invested into something that did not do what it was supposed to do.
Right. So I think that's kind of where I'm evaluating what I want to do in the game. I really love the community, both the people in this chat, but and also the developers. It's a group of people that really cares about the community and puts a lot of time into trying to make this work. Um, you know, all of these are enormous jobs. Content creation for 5 or 6 thousand cards is huge. If you think about how much DishNet puts in which essentially like his side gig, how much effort he puts into really making this game enjoyable. There's a lot of stuff I love about the game. But what really worries me is that now we're sort of being told that we shouldn't trust the developers with the way they're handling the game engine and our ability to make long-term plans. And I think that's where I'm trying to figure out kind of what to do going forward. I'm open to suggestions from the community on how that should work. But I think at least that's kind of where we're at the moment. Yeah.
And
Hold on. I think Kidneys just dropped off the. I was going to say something clever and then just dropped off the call. Did we get you back?
Discord likes crashing. It's done it
Okay.
a lot the past 2 weeks. I'm back.
He's back.
Izadafo has a great point, right? Where Connor Joe could have even gone down more than 8 because it was very clear cards were capped at moving 8 up or down. Whether that's a just initial update thing or all updates moving forward was yet to see. But very clearly something was extremely wrong with not just Connor Joe, but a handful of things, right? So.
Yeah. Anyway, and I want to be clear that this is not we didn't intend this stream to be entirely negative. There are a lot of things that we all like about the game, and that's why we keep playing it.
Yep. Well.
But.
Yeah.
I
mean, we wouldn't be here if we weren't doing it because we're here because we care about it, right?
But I think the thing that I am trying to communicate is that at least at the moment I feel stuck as far as kind of what to be presenting and what kind of advice to give, because all of this is predicated on having some level of confidence in what the rules are going to be going forward.
Right, and that's another thing as Adafo too. If I understand your model is rather similar to mine, right? And we're not doing what Charles is, right? And like as much as I trust you, Charles, like what you're doing could be horribly wrong, right? Without data, and
sure, you want different models, and different models are all telling you,
right, but
to slightly different extent, but the same story.
Well, and that's kind of what I'm saying is Adafo and I. We've gotten some pushback from some people out of the park saying that what we're doing is just wrong, and I don't think that's right because all the people who are just looking at what the game is spitting out have come to the same conclusion. And for out of the park, I've seen in a few cases has taken an us versus them stance on how the game is being run, right? I think that's a huge mistake. I wish they would we could have our little kumbaya by the campfire because we all care about the game. Maybe their vision of the game is very different than our vision of the game, but I think just to kind of stop talking about changes and not give us any details and say that we're not doing the right things would probably be a huge loss for everybody involved. So,
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, anyway, this is probably about a good point to wrap up then.
Yeah,
is there someone we can raid?
Done. Can we beat EVC?
Ooh, we can! We can raid EVC.
We can! That's the no-brainer then.
Alright.
Thanks everybody for coming out and listening to us talk. I think y'all know what to expect by now from us. I feel like moving forward, more streams will look like this. Maybe we'll pick a topic to roughly cover and then spend 3 hours talking and an hour on the topic, but we'll figure it out, right?
I think we'll see. I mean, I think what I would really like to see I would really like to see the game designers tell us, so even if it were something like, well, the only band-aid we have for whatever reason is just like one overall scaling, so we're going to have to we recognize now that we're going to do this once a month. If they
Right.
told us that, it's not the way I would have wanted to implement it, but, you know, we'd be able to plan around it. And what we would start doing
Hmm.
as long term planning oriented players, what we would start doing is we would start trying to work out, well, based on what we're observing, how are they likely to patch the game engine this time?
Right. Or even just sell all my expensive stuff before the update and buy back new stuff after it, right? Like there's so many better outcomes here if they would just be open and communicate, and not just the live update or, the game engine, but a lot of things, right? I feel like would be a lot better um, doing it that way. So,
Okay, if you're asking, could I rebuild the Warbot model with the new changes? That depends on what they change. The
right.
idea of what the Warbot model's doing is essentially, every time they change something in their code, I have to figure out what it is and change it in my code. If
Yep.
they do something that is really easy to guess, then I will be able to reverse engineer it really quickly because I have an idea of the other things they've done, and so I have an idea of like where good places are to start guessing. Um,
Right.
if they've done something that's very different than anything they've done before, or they've done something really complex, then it'll take me longer to try to reverse engineer it. But the problem is
Also,
if they then will change it again, there's a point that it's kind of not worth chasing.
yep. And I think for me personally, right, changes literally nothing about what I do. It's just going to be a lot more time commitment on my part to fill in new data and rerun the model because mine doesn't work at the click of a button. And be a week, or I'm going to try and really streamline it over a few days, but realistically, it'll be a week, and I'll come back and I'll tell you guys exactly what's different. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I will say also, I feel like with a game like this, they could. I don't think it actually is a big advantage to the game for the engine to be, hidden.
Nope.
Um, I it's an advantage for players like me and players like Kidneys that have put effort into trying to figure out what it does. But
Yep.
I think the game would be entirely playable if they just told us all the rules transparently as well.
I think
So,
it actually
you
be
know,
would solve a lot of the problems of people not getting how to build tournaments. And if you did that, maybe start with fixing all the statistics that don't actually tell you how the game plays. That would be where I would start. Things like WOBA should be very easy to fix in this game, and they are not accurate right now. So
yeah, I
that's
think
all.
you yeah, I mean I think you no, but I do think, you know, the philosophy of the game as I understand it is that they expose all of these ratings, and so therefore in principle they are trying to tell you how good the player is at everything. That in general, like, the philosophy seems to be, we're being open about how this card behaves because we've told you all of the ratings. If they wanted it to
Yep.
be a game that was more about observing data, what they could do is just release a card and not not give you all of the ratings, or even release a card and sort of say intentionally, we're going to do the same thing we do in the base game. There's going to be some sort of scouting, and this is approximately the rating of the card. You observe it and try it and figure it out.
Right.
Um, the design of the game seems instead to be one where they're trying to tell us, no, we're going to give you all of the information. Apparently, I get to enter something again. We're going to give you all of the information. Uh, you know, Speaking of low diamond cap. So see, it hasn't filled
Hmm.
now. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
we're going to give you all of the information that you need in order to figure out what's going on. And so I think in keeping with that philosophy, they definitely could choose to make the game engine more public if they wanted to. Um,
Yep. I also
and
think
yeah,
there's good points in chat, right? Like not only is basically every non-counting stat not accurately weighted, if there's any weighting to do whatsoever, there are things like the triple rating. Like, a big change this year was we're using historical triple ratings for a lot of players, and there's nowhere to see it on a card. It's just gone now. And ground ball, fly ball rating, we get a scale of 0 to 4 when we know they have a percentage for every card. Like, why do you need to do that? It's a game design philosophy that I don't think lines up with the people who want to play this game, right? And I feel like if they made it so it wasn't just you and me, Charles, and a few other people having to reverse engineer how the game works to play the game and have fun, it would be a lot more approachable for everybody, right?
Yeah, I definitely think there are things that they could do, but at a minimum, I think the idea is that if the way the game is set up, the way the game is currently set up, essentially what they're doing is they're telling players that if you want to be competitive without kind of owning every card, you have to put effort into understanding the game well enough to only go for targeted cards. And in order for that to be a playable game, which cards are good, which cards are good basically have to be static. I don't mean in the sense that the meta is static, but they're always releasing new cards, and because of power creep, every card eventually gets put out of business. But in the current meta, if this pitcher's good and this other pitcher's bad, it should always be the case that between those two pitchers, the one that's good is good and the one that's bad is bad, essentially.
Right. And I think I think in my ideal world, and it's really easy to do, my spreadsheet should be basically useless, right? If the game gave you statistics properly weighted,
I'm so tempted to jump into the comment here.
No, but I'm serious, right? Like there should never be a reason for what exactly I'm doing to be useful, right? It shouldn't. Like WOBA in games should work. Defense ratings in games should work. Like this stuff, in my opinion, is really, to me, my biggest issue with how things are being presented right now. So. Yep.
Yeah, so I do have more tolerance for that for a really simple reason, which is we don't understand how this stuff works in baseball either yet, in a lot of cases, and so it doesn't shock me that even for a game which is clearly on the developer's end, deeply rooted in attempting to incorporate a modern understanding of statistics, and that's one of the things that it does really well. It doesn't surprise me that it still is difficult to reflect things like the value of defense, because we still don't understand the value of defense. Let me give you a really simple example. Everybody coming into this season was thinking about what will it mean to ban the shift defensively in Major League Baseball. I saw a bunch of articles trying to project it.
Yep.
Doesn't look like any of them really hit it on the nose.
Right. I will say, like, if they want to hide defense, fine. It's not real life. They should be able to tell the real numbers, and the real numbers we get spit out are wrong. I will say that there really isn't an excuse for WOBA being wrong or WSB being wrong. Those are real statistical things that were solved 20 years ago in the baseball world, and they should not be changing at the way they are and out of the park and not line up with how they work in real life, right? And the fact that I can solve it in Excel, I think, is a huge miss for a game that's supposed to be about baseball stats, right? So.
Yeah, so I think I do think some of these bug fixes, like, it would be good if the communication went both ways in that sense. But I do think part of the solution to this maybe is that they should look at. So my understanding is that they at least do have ways that some players kind of communicate back to the developers right? They do have internal betas and things like that. But I think it would be a good idea to get some of the more, model or data oriented people in that group, giving them feedback. And I think that
Yeah.
would help with something like this too, because like I said, this was something where ultimately the problem that is now being addressed is one that was immediately apparent.
Yeah, I mean, it was obvious to a
Um,
bunch of people I talked to the first day of the public beta that something was wrong,
right.
right?
But this is now why I'm frustrated, is because the solution that they've announced is one that is also obviously wrong.
Right. It's very obviously they're compensating for the cards we've chosen to play for the issue they're fixing, right? Which means when they fix the issue, we'll play other cards and then it's going to be probably thrown out of whack, right? Again, and maybe we're back to PT21 where the only ratings that matter are BABIP and Avoid K. I don't know. We'll have to see on Monday. But the fact that they're touching Avoid K and Home Run at all just does not. I mean, maybe, again, like I said, there could be an issue in the code, but they haven't said a word about it, so I don't know. But from my outside view, as somebody who looks at the data.
So I will say that they did touch these things between 23 and 24.
Yes, they did. But I will say,
Yeah.
looking at the data, I would say that any adjustment to Ks or home runs right now, looking at data, would be wrong. Right? That would be my assessment. So.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can hope, no, but I guess they would have announced it if so. I mean, because the simplest thing would have been basically saying, we're going to rethink pitcher BABIP. We're going to essentially go back to the 23 game engine where the balance seemed to be better.
There's a bug report forum on the Out of the Park forums. I feel like that's the place we're supposed to put this stuff. If you have questions, there's Matt. I forget where Matt posted, somewhere on the forums. It seems like the forums are the place to access the developers. I don't know any developer who actually frequents the Discord. I don't know what level of Alex is a developer. I know he was kind of in between sometime last year, and but like most of these changes are talked about on the forums. So if you have questions about what's going on, you want to talk about the live update, like I said, I opened a bug report there. There has not been a word on it. Last I checked, like 2 days ago. Ask questions there. Bump these topics. Make it known that this is a thing we want to hear about. I mean, I don't know. I do feel one of the things I mentioned earlier a little bit. I've never really been in a public-facing games Discord that's so quiet from the people running the game, and I get it hasn't been the most friendly place over the years, but it's actually pretty great right now. It's probably the best state it's ever been in, and I do wish we could have a little bit higher level of interaction than we do, because again, if they talked about what the reasons for a lot of these things are, yeah, it's, I don't know. So we get are we going to raid EVC, or are we gonna
Yes. All right. Let's raid EVC and we'll. All right. Sounds good. We're gonna wrap it up. We'll catch you all later.
Yep.
All right. All right. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Setting up the raid.